the transport sector. So our chair will be Ms. Pamela Chiang, a senior transport specialist, Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, SDCC, ADB, Philippines. Pamela is an experienced team leader with 20 years of international experience in the development and management of transport projects, including urban transit system, railways, seaport, airport roads, and etc., and regional connectivity. So I think without further ado, I will give the floor to Ms. Chiang.
Thank you very much, Nella. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, clearly.
All right, okay, thank you. So first of all, I would just like to thank ADBI for inviting me to this really important event. It is really exciting actually to learn about, the wide range of research on this topic. And this is highly relevant at this point in time. And of course, it provides very timely insights for countries around the world, particularly with, as we all know, Paris alignment being a very hot topic at the moment. So we in ADB are committed to supporting countries to progress towards low carbon and even net zero strategies going forward. So it is very encouraging to see the sharing of knowledge today and hope that can inspire all to take positive steps in this direction. So I'm very delighted to introduce our eminent panel of speakers today, and let me invite them to switch on their cameras if they can and give a little wave as I introduce. First, we have Professor Sanjit Purohit from National Council of Applied Economic Research, India. Thank you, Professor Purohit, for joining us. It looks like you're in a very interesting location, but thank you so much for making for this conference today. And secondly, we have Dr. Saqib Amin, Associate Professor from Department of Economics, School of Business and Economics, North South University, Bangladesh. Is he here? Okay, and all right, great. And we have Dr. Kenmei Zubota, professor, and he is faculty of the Global and Regional Studies of Tokyo University in Japan. I hope he is here with us. Yes, he is. And finally, we have Mr. Rompet Banshaidi, Director of the Public Policy and Technical Support Office, Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization. So just a gentle reminder to all our speakers to please keep to time, because time is quite limited and we have quite a full agenda. And I will mention 2 more minutes just before your time is up. So let's start with the very first paper, which is paper 5, Role of Policy Interventions in Limiting Emissions from Vehicles in Delhi, 2020 to 2030. So Professor Purohit, let me hand over to you for the next 15 minutes to take us through your paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I must say that I think I am clear, right?
Yes, you are.
See, this is a work joined with my co-author Soumi Roy Chaudhary and Rajiv Singh, who are not there. I'm presenting on behalf of them. I'm one of the co-authors. So there are other authors. So basically, I just by your slides, should I share or you are with share this slide control? Should I share my screen?
I'm not sure who is sharing, but it is online now.
I think. Okay, so I think if I share next time, probably you can share. I think somebody is sharing. It looks like, I think Dina somebody. Okay. So basically what? Well, India is one of the countries with a highest exposure or particulate matter. Usually, particulate concentration in India in most of the state is more than 10 milligram cubic meter, microgram cubic meter, which is basically set by WHO. Just because of the high pollution level, as an Indian usually live much around 5.2 years less. And this lifespan can be extended if we are able to maintain the global air pollution. So we are seeing maintaining a clean air is one of the top priority. And Delhi, being the capital city, is one of the reasons everybody, more media attention comes. So there are focus to improve the air quality in Delhi. Now there are many sources of air pollution in Delhi. Our concentration on this paper is basically on fossil fuel vehicles, which contribute to 39%. There are other kind of road dust, industry, or constant activity, but we will basically concentrate on fossil fuel things. Next slide, please. Yeah. So basically, there are many kind of the multiple kind of sector approach has been adopted recent years. For example, initially our quality of fossil fuel are low, and now our quality of fossil fuel, which is Bharat Standard 6, which is basically kind of things which are more in line with the Euro 6 kind of fuel or what India is now being rolled out. Even our car standards, which are earlier is Bharat Stage 1, Bharat Stage 2, these are much inferior to the Euro 6 standards. Now, basically from February 2016, Bharat Standard 6 is adopted for all vehicles for manufacturer after April 2020, which is basically conformed to the European standard. Another kind of since comprehension growth is a better fuel with less emissions. So this has been introduced all over Delhi since 2001 and are now adopted in many other states or metros in India. Also, electrification of public transport vehicles are proposed by Niti Aayog, basically urban official think tank in India. Next slide, please. So cleaning up Delhi's air is a priority, and basically in this paper, our objective is basically to understand to what extent the level of emissions can be removed or reduced if we do some policy changes, kind of policy interventions are rolled out or proposed to be rolled out. Our time spent period is around decade 2022, 2030, in these 10 years. Next slide, please. So there are many kind of study has been done for emission of scenario building. But here are two kind of things. We select some cities all over India, and different kind of policy intervention which are proposed or has been done with different kind of modeling activity. Basically, international vehicular emission model is usually adopted by researchers. Also, in some of the cases, time series models are also done. In our case, basically, we did this kind of international vehicle emission models. The earlier studies basically also this kind of findings, like in what kind of VS4 files or VS6 files, what kind of emission we reduce. We also do, but we have some more kind of things. Our is focus in Delhi, more kind of CNG, introduction of CNG, introduction of electrical vehicles, how it changes the emission profile. That also is our priority. Next slide, please. This is other kind of studies. I think we can skip this. So these are the kind of studies. We can go to the next slide, please. So basically, we are doing to three kind of policy scenario: optimist scenario, pessimistic scenario, and BAU scenario. Business scenario is there no new policy intervention is done, apart from the introduction of Euro 6 vehicles. Optimist scenario, we assume that most of the 50% of the public transport are converted to electricity by 2024 and 100% by 2029. 20% of two-wheeler vehicles and three-wheeler cents are assumed to be electric, and 55% of the new two-wheeler and three-wheeler cents are to be electric by 2020. Given the economic slowdown and over the pandemic, we assume this kind of optimistic scenario may be realized. So basically, we tone down this kind of optimistic scenario with a more realistic kind of, which we call the pessimistic scenario. Of course, is a part of the things, emission from fossil fuel or transport sector, but we assume there is no other kind of policy intervention is taken place. Next slide, please. So these are this kind of our emission, total emissions. Depends on the emissions by the number of vehicles. Depends on the number of vehicles, type of vehicles, and the average distance covered. So all these three factors, distance, type of vehicles, this whole combination to give you the emission profile of a particular type of vehicles, depending on the fuel type. And also emissions comes for different kind of pollutants which comes. So for each pollutant, we try to get from the vehicles, if this X number of distance travels, what will be emissions for a day or so per day. Summing about a day, each vehicle would emit different kind of pollutants. So we sum our different kind of pollutant, we get a trajectory of pollutant of different kind. Summing of the vehicles, we get the emissions for a day or a year or something like that. This is the basically mechanism. Next slide, please. And obviously, there are some kind of assumptions. I think given the shortage of time, probably we can skip off it of this. The major thing we have to assume some kind of things. This kind of transition takes place, and some kind of assumption of data average this. So we are assuming that one major assumption we are now making is that since we are using information from COVID-19 Community Mobility Report of Google, we assume the 40% average reduction of vehicle users during this period of 6 months to February. And we expect this trend to continue. Otherwise, we are assuming some kind of assumption are there, how much is travels. These are based on the survey data. How much a two-wheeler travels, how much three-wheeler travels, four-wheeler travels, or private vehicles, or commercial or public transport travels. These are assumptions we are making it. Also, we have assumed since the lifespan of a vehicle also we are assuming. This also assumption feed into our emission model, and ultimately we get it. Next slide, please. So this is one of the important things. The transition rate is the incremental rate at which shares of new vehicles progressively transfer into a new type of vehicle. This comes, as you know, new vehicles are always better, less polluting. So more transition, higher the transition rate, pollution will automatically reduce. And we have made some assumption about what are the transition rate of two-wheeler, three-wheeler, or light-duty vehicles, and how they are transited either to go into compressed natural gas or to electric vehicles.
It's just me or okay?
No, I can't hear Professor Pohit any longer.
Okay, I think it automatically. Yeah, now I can hear you. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you.
So this is kind of, you are getting our emission profiles based on this kind of thing, how the distribution changes. See, the slower the distribution changes, the emission on fall. Given the backlog of last kind of two-wheeler or VS3 all polluting vehicles, we found that transition to electric vehicles, if you have a distribution of vehicles overall in Delhi city, it changes very little over the 10-year period. So probably 20 or 30 years period is needed to call this. As you can see, electric vehicles, probably for ADBI vehicles only come to 20%. Similarly, light duty vehicles, it comes to only 4% or 5%. I mean, similarly, electric buses or negligible, it comes to it, only 0.1%. So transition takes time. It won't be a quick process. 10-year decades is not a much time. Next slide, please. So, but whatever is your emission, there is some direction in emission takes place from different kinds of vehicles. We are showing a particular better or carbon monoxide kind of emissions. Next slide, please. So NOx or hydrocarbon, this except for NOx, all these emissions are coming down basically, it's fine, but progression is true. So basically, this kind of whatever policy being adopted are not enough for do it. We probably dusting the reaction is 10 years period on, probably won't do much change unless we have a dusting policy measures are taken. Next slide, please. So what is the signification? There is signification of decline in type of emission takes place. And overall, it finds a reduction of 52% reduction in particulate matter emissions from the transport sector. In optimal scenario, amounts to around 20% decrease in overall PM emissions. Our multi-front action is needed in the long run. There is need to discourage personal use of vehicles among citizens by various incentives or disincentives mechanisms, namely increased parking fee, increased tax on fuel or vehicles, pedestrian-friendly policy, encouragement of non-fossil-based transportation system, and increased reach of public transport. Next slide, please. Obviously, introduction of year of BS6 fuel policy in Delhi impact the PM emissions level and change in fuel ratio from Bharat 4 to Bharat 6 is expected to lead to reduction in the emissions. But introduction of BS6 fuels all over India will similarly reduce transport sector emissions to match the cleaner initiative taken by the government of India. Electric vehicles have the potential to be major driving force. However, unless there is subsidies given to electric vehicles or promote investment in critical battery technology and find innovation ways to expand fast battery charging facility, it would never happen. Problem is kind of investment in the battery technology is not much because most of these kind of our batteries are production capacity is not much. Many of the inputs which are used for this production of batteries are not domestically produced. And next come to question, how we go do it. For example, though India has an ambitious plan of renewable electricity production, is still slow. So we are making a lot of progress in solar energy. Problem is many of our solar kind of electricity production is based on imported solar panels. So we are becoming import dependent kind of renewable energy scheme, which is not very good because for a country like India, if you have to do a large scale of everything to renewable energy based, it has to be domestically produced.
Otherwise, you have 1 more minute to go, please. Okay. Thank you.
So basically, so that's the things. While emission is this all kind of sharp, kind of complementary facility which is needed for develop for this charging, but it has to be domestically production capacities to be built. Otherwise, this kind of emission policy on the way to successful for a city. This model, Delhi model has to be replicated in other countries, other cities of the India. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pohit. Now, Dr. Amin, may I invite you next to discuss your views on the paper, please? Thank you. And after that, we will have a round of Q&A. Thank you. Dr. Amin?
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Professor Sanjay Pohit, for a nice presentation. It is my privilege to be the discussant of this paper, and I am thankful to ADBI for inviting me as a discussant. So this paper deals with a very important issue, as we all know that air pollution is now the biggest environmental risk for early death, responsible for more than 6 million premature deaths each year globally, associated from the heart attacks, strokes, diabetics, and the other respiratory diseases. And that is more than the death from AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. So the existing research suggests that around the world, 9 out of 10 people actually they breathe unhealthy air, and long-term exposure to some sort of pollutants increases the risk of many sort of emissional issues. And a few of the recent studies also highlight that air pollution from the transport sector can also have impact on the mental health. It can affect the productivity level of the workers, and also the overall, different macroeconomic and stock market indicators. Following the global trend, okay, just once again, can you go back, move on to the next slide? Excellent. Okay, so following the global trend, what we can see, India is no exception to this trend. If we look at the literature, I can see that around 1.7 million deaths in India were attributable to air pollution in 2009, and which was 18% of the total deaths in the country. The economic loss due to the lost output from premature deaths and morbidity from air pollution was around 1.4% of the GDP in India in 2009, which is almost equivalent to 36.8 billion US dollar. Okay, if I further dig out the data, I can see that the economic loss due to air pollution as a percentage of state GDP was higher in the northern and central India states, which is the highest in the Uttar Pradesh, 2.2% of the GDP, and in Bihar, 2% of the GDP. So it is very important to understand the best way to develop solutions. It is important to better understand this invisible threat from this air pollution. And we all know that air pollution is actually a mixture of small particles. For instances, like, the particulate matter PM is made up of small airborne particles like dust, soot, and drops of liquids. The majority of PM in urban areas is formed directly, like, from burning fossil fuels by different power plants, and also heavily from the automobiles. Given this background, like, by using an international vehicle emissions model, Professor Sanjit Purohit analyzes the interplay between the policy shifts of the transport and the level of emissions for Delhi over the next 10 years under three different scenarios: an optimistic scenario, a pessimistic scenario, and a business as usual scenario. So I must say this is a very good research indeed, as introducing a light vehicle emissions standard is consistent with the government's policies principles in many countries. It seems to be a best practice regulation globally. And the light vehicle emissions standards are a crucial part of a cost-effective strategy for overcoming the market failures and behavioral barriers to more fuel-efficient and lower emissions vehicles. And what we can see that the findings of the study reveal a decline in the emissions of different particles from the proposed policy introduction of the BS6 and battery electric fuel vehicles. So this is my overall summary, like, from the presentation of Professor Sanjit Purohit. Now, can you move on to the next slide? I just, mention a few points just to make the, like, paper, like, more readable, to increase the readability. So first of all, you can see there are few strong points. So I must appreciate. So I'm not going to read those out, but I like to focus on the points where still I think it can be improved, So the introduction sections needs to be improved. For example, the version that I have received, that what I can see, we need a clear, like, background of the research, the current research knowledge gap, how this gap is addressed, discussing the results and drawing broader and more general conclusions for the taking home messages for the readers. It was there, but I think it needs to be more articulated. And also, I think perhaps it is better if introduction sections also needs to be updated, aligning with the main research questions and objectives. I can see Professor Purohit has already discussed the objectives in his presentation. For many of us, like, we are not very familiar about the Bharat stage, like, different options. So he has discussed, but I think perhaps it would be easier for the readers, at least from the layman perspective, if you can actually provide the link of those, different BS, so that we can have a clear idea about this sort of, policies. Another point I'd like to mention that perhaps you can focus on some stylized facts to increase the readability, because what would be the different emission status of in the past years in Delhi in comparison with the other states, in comparison with the regional neighboring countries and the global perspective. So that will make the paper more interesting. I think perhaps the literature review section maybe extend it a bit and provide a better discussion about the significance of the international vehicle emissions model. Perhaps you can actually include a technical appendix, or once again you can refer to a paper where the people, the readers like us, can have a clear idea about the IV model from the layman's perspective, because for many of us, we are not fully aware about this model, but from my understanding, from my readings, I can see that this is sort of a very robust method, to measure the efficiency of the policy adoption. If you look at the conclusion, I think it is better to say a few words about the limitations of this study and the future scope of the research. Right? You can discuss these sort of issues in the conclusion. And then now you have discussed about the data and the sources of data very nicely, but perhaps you can slightly elaborate why you have chosen the variables. I mean, an explanation can be given for the selection of variables in the model. Okay, and then the final thing that I would like to mention, that like you mainly focus on Delhi. What would be the emission level over the next 10 years under the 3 different scenarios? I'm just wondering whether, like, we have any plan to extend this analysis by including the other state in India, and also to check how robust your result is in comparison to the, other areas. For example, I have already mentioned previously, like Bihar. So just for thoughts. So overall, it's a very nice research. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amin. Thank you. So, hang on. All right. Okay. So we have some questions coming through, and I think the first question up from Nicholas from NS Comex. How does do the climate policies include maritime and airport objectives? So, Professor Pohit, if you may want to respond to that.
Thank you.
The question was, thank you.
Yeah, no, basically what I can say this maritime, there are also, of course they are very much relevant, but Delhi, because maritime does not make us, in Delhi is a city, so there is no maritime, does not focus at all. So I don't think it's relevant, but other methods may possibly not. The overall country is a possibility, but a city, I think it's maritime linkage is very difficult to establish, I would say. Yes.
Okay. So it's mainly land-based transport based on the
basically land based transport. There is no kind to this. These are not relevant for India. Relevant for India, not for city.
Okay. So what kind of fuel is India currently mostly using for the cars? Are there any plans to improve the type?
India is now Euro 6 fuels using. All over India is Euro 6 fuels. So that is okay. I mean, that is fine. And regarding my discussion, Shakib comment, see why I'm sticking to Delhi is basically all these policy things are introduced first in Delhi, then to replicate. And another reason I have no plan, because this is part of another study which we did, the kind of issue regarding comorbidity, etc. Basically, we also did a study this kind of what is the loss of life years in Delhi. This is still not in public domain, basically. So we calculate what kind of GDP loss, how much is life year loss. This all has been done only for Delhi. And the data for the other metros are not really relevant. So we have to stick to Delhi, basically, to see the experiment how it works. Thank you. And your other suggestions are very nice. And I will try to revise the panel, we will take into account. Thank you for giving excellent suggestions.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for a nice paper and presentation.
Thank you. Do you think that there would, another question is, do you think that there are other ways transportation is helping to reduce pollution? And another question to that, follow on to that, is has the use of bikes increased in the cities? I think this is an interesting question because I think in this pandemic.
Please pardon, I could not hear it. Please pardon the question.
Yes. So what other means of transportation are contributing to pollution reduction? And Nicholas is also asking, has the use of bikes actually increased? And I think this is interesting because in the pandemic situation, actually, we are seeing kind of interesting trends, like, you know, people are moving out of the mass transit systems because of the fear of, you know, close proximity, and moving on to their bikes and walking. So maybe you can share with us with the situation.
If you look at the data of second-hand car sales, because the public transport, many of the public transport in Delhi has been closed. Okay, so the sale of second-hand bike, etc., has increased. In fact, people are depending more on individual transport. It is true. This happened in Delhi because I think only this month on the Delhi metro has been started operational. Otherwise, everyone should depend on bike. The problem is extreme climate and far distance is not bike is not very convenient medium. So basically going to two-wheeler, which is a more polluting than a car, modern car. So in a sense, there is this pandemic is another lesson for India. Though travel has reduced because many of the work is going from home. Working from home is very much important. So there is on balance this kind of both. There is sales of second-hand cars, polluting car bike is increasing. Along with there will be reduction in demand for transport is taking place.
Okay. And we have a more light-hearted question to me, and maybe I'll just respond here. Gentleman, Mr. Duraraja was asking, I mentioned Professor Pohit is in an interesting location. What I meant is it looks like he's making his way, and I'm very glad that he's still able to make it despite, you know, I think he looks like he's stuck in traffic, but thanks for joining us. Now, I myself have a question for...
We're stuck in traffic. So that's why I'm busy otherwise. Could not reach the office.
Yes, and very much appreciate you for joining us, even while on transit. Now, I have a question for you, actually, Professor Pohit.
Sure.
I wondered, what is the grid factor in India that you have assumed? And does your model assume any changes in the carbon grid factor over time that might contribute to, you know, even lower, or I mean, how does that come into play?
Actually, we are assuming a fixed kind of factor. I have not changed it. Grid factor. I mean, emission factor for each car, we have assumed a fixed assumption. Of course, over time, after 5 years, new car comes. Of course, the grid factor should reduce carbon emission factor. We have not done this, is not done incorporated yet. I agree. Actually, it should change according to the age of the farm, and we don't have data of this kind of car age-wise emission factor. I could not get data for this study.
All right, no worries. So we have one more question, maybe one more before we move on to the next segment. We have Mr. Shakti Prakash. What are the views of manufacturers and industries involved in manufacturing EVs and BART-6 CNG transportation systems regarding performance of their products in reducing air pollutants? Do you have any views on that, Professor Pohit, or even, you know, Dr. Amin?
Actually, I think there are resistance from the automobile lobby or sector as such. And this resistance increased significantly because of the pandemic. Because earlier, I think before the pandemic, automobile agreed to the Euro 6, on the government announced the Euro 6 fuel, Euro 6 car standard has to be introduced. They more or less agree, review or introduction, they are more or less in favor of it. But after this pandemic, automobile sector is clearly down, demand is down. So they are in a hardship. And many of these things probably policy kind of suggestion, intervention will be delayed. That is my view of the pandemic situation. And car demand has been, before the pandemic, car demand was down, but still they were willing to do this kind of investment, large kind of investment. But with pandemic, I think this investment has slowed down. Even for EV, etc., same problem is happening.
Thank you. I have a question, but maybe if I ask the rest of the panel speakers, actually, you've been all awfully quiet. Let us know if you have any questions. Unmute yourself and let us know. If not, while you're thinking, maybe since we still have, you answered it so quickly, Professor Pohit, so maybe one more question for you. what do you feel could be a critical enabler, for that government or, other development partners can do to expedite this whole e-mobility in India?
See, one of the things is that one is other pricing, how you make the public transport pricing. See, in Delhi, public transport is quite expensive. It's cheaper to travel by bike than by a metro, etc. For example, I think European model, etc., like Luxembourg, where the public transport is free. If it's not free, you have to give an incentive to public transport to be low. That's the way, I think, that's the best way to emission to reduce. I would say that is the best thing, which government is not doing it. But that is most of the first intervention should be done. Make public transport cheaper.
That's a good point. So, I mean, going back to, I think, the Professor Akihisa, I think it's not just a single sector solution. I think it's a cross-cutting solution, like, decarbonizing. It's not just transport. It's not just public transport. It's also climate policies as well as, energy policies as well. Something just popped up on my screen. Was that intended? There's a poll. Is this something that I'm not aware of this, but why don't we just go with it? We have a poll now.
Yeah.
Are you all able to see it?
So sorry, Pam, please just continue. It will appear by itself. So
are we participating in this poll, Dina?
yeah, anyone can participate, but you can ignore it if you.
Oh, I can ignore it. Okay,
Yeah.
So I'll just move on then. I'll just close it and I'll move on. Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Pohit and Dr. Amin, for sharing your views on the paper. Thank you. And let us maybe wrap up this paper 5 and we move on to the next one, which is paper 6, the economic and environmental impacts of dedicated freight corridors in India. Spatial computable general equilibrium model. So Dr. Zubota, let me hand over to you for the next 15 minutes, please, to take us through your paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So can you see my slide?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. And you are hearing me. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Kenmei Tsubota from Toyo University. And this paper is co-authored with my friends from IDJETRO and ADBI. And today we are going to talk about the trains and the trucks, mainly in India. So one of the questions to the previous session was that what do you think are the kind of ways of transportation helping to reduce pollution? One of my answer can be let's use trains, and this is it. So let's go. And what I say about dedicated freight corridor is this blue one, blue line, and red line. The blue one is Western dedicated freight corridor. Only the railways can only transport the containers or the freights. And the Western one is red and the Eastern one is blue, all right? Dedicated freight corridor, from our result, it can serve to a double purpose. One, economic impacts, increasing economic activities and trade. Second, environmental impacts, reducing CO2 emissions. On the economic part, they're making the freight rates cheaper and trains faster and enabling larger capacity. It is drastic compared to the existing ones. And increasing the reliability in time is another important factor for the business users. You don't know when to arrive, or if you can't say that when you can get your manufacturer the goods, then it's a big trouble. So the reliability is also important part. And then naturally that you may think that what is the economic impact or how large is it? So we show it in our spatial maps because the impacts are not country level, but in the regional level, or we can estimate. And so we will see it. And on the environmental parts, yeah, so the currently, yeah, I think you need to, if you don't know, you need to ask the Google, but you'd be amazed if you see the pictures of the Indian trucks. They are so decorative and very big and how to say, yeah, it's so unique anyway. But actually, how to say, the emission level is also high. So we would suggest that yeah, please use railways, which can offer a much more punctual and faster transportation. So when it's installed, right? And so how large are the environmental impacts is the next question. And taking up all of these things, it is not a direct impact which we examine, because the completion of the railways will induce several impacts, and the relocation of the firms, relocation of the people, and the agglomeration of economic activities and urbanization. Many things are happening. These are called the wider economic benefits, and environmental impacts are not the direct one, but coming up. So why not examining it? So yeah, what we propose or what we show can be regarded as the wider economic benefits from this project. So firstly, results in brief. We use the spatial computable general equilibrium model, and which has a feature of agglomeration economies and a modal choice and detailed geospatial data. We evaluate evaluate 3 scenarios: one, Eastern DFC, Western DFC, and both together. As I said, we will examine economic impact and environmental impact. On the economic part, at least it will increase 0.96% in the real GDP, and the spatial visualization shows that the DFC will some benefit to the surrounding regions. On the environmental part, transportation sector will drastically change, shifting from trucks to railways is expected, and which can reduce CO2s, and CO2 emissions can be reduced. And we also see synergy effect. In the mathematics class, if I would say 1 + 1 is, if I don't say that 1 + 1 is not equal to 2, then I'm wrong. But what we will show is that 1 + 1 should be sorry 1 + 1 together is actually larger than 1 + 1 strength. But I mean, I won't say that separate introduction of the project will reduce the impact. So the both together will bring the larger benefit. So what we will say, what we will talk today is the situation of India, and then what we do with our model, and a bit more on our model. Probably we will skip it, and then I will talk about a bit more the result. So probably what I have to say is that the current Indian railways are expensive, highly subsidized to the passengers, and the freights are charged higher, and they resulted in the costs among the highest in the world, nearly double compared to the United States or China level. And the speed is very low, 25 km/h, and delays are frequent, and no assurance of arrival time. It's a kind of disaster situation. But then, they are thinking to introduce the DFC. It's soon coming. So our method, we call it IDGSM. It's a geographical simulation model. It's a SCGE, a spatial CGE model. Oops, one missing. But we have the model based on the spatial economics, which has the feature of agglomeration in population and economies or sectors, which is a quite popular phenomena in nature, that the urbanization is important, and also the clustering of the industries are observed. Now we have regional level of the data, so country level of data cannot reveal how the domestic highways or domestic railways can change the economies. So the regional data is important, and difference in the sectors are important because the sending potatoes and the computers should be different. And we have multimodal choice. So air, railways, trucks, and ships all are in it. And not only India, but all other nations are in our data like this. So the blue ones are all with the at least prefecture level or state level, or it's the sub-national level data. And we have more focus on the developing countries. So we have extensive data and including transportation as well. Okay, so compared to the traditional cost-benefit analysis, we show more on the economic impact and environmental impacts, not only the direct ones, I mean, which can be called the wider economic benefit. So please, you can say that this is beyond the traditional cost-benefit analysis. So in the benchmark model of 2010, a bit of blue are observed in Africa and South Asia and other Asian countries. But in 2030, slightly the color has changed. Okay, it's the without the intervention or result. Yeah, naturally that these regions can grow, but with certain scenario, we will see how the economic benefit may happen or not. It depends on the location. So we will consider east, west, and both dedicated corridors. Results are shown in 3 maps. One on the eastern one or western one, or the both together. So the results are seen that the eastern one has 0.57 and the western one has a 0.32 increase of the regional real GDP per capita, but with both will bring 0.96%, which is larger than the sum of each. So at least that we can expect some synergy effect from the result. And as is clear that the positive impact are found from the surrounding regions. But not limited, right? So here, or around here, there is no train directly, but since it's they are connected to the network, somehow the benefit will be spread. And on the environmental part, we do the 2 steps. One, the modal choice or the change from the trucks to the railways will reduce CO2. Yes, but it will bring the freight rates cheaper, meaning that it will increase the economic activities as we saw in the previous one. So actually the increasing transportation, increasing the economic activities will increase the CO2. So we have to check what's the net effect. So we calculated this result here. by benchmarking the CO2 emission in India, which is supplied to the UN, so usually the contribution of the CO2 emissions are calculated by sector. So we take this method, and then so the baseline is 0. Compared to that, eastern one would be 0.75 minus, and 1.40 is the western one, and the both together will bring the minus 2.19. It's larger reduction compared to the sum of each. So the synergy effect can be observed on the environmental impact as well. It's a good news, right? I was amazed by looking at this result. So yeah, so let's make both. It's the implication from here. So yeah, conclusion can be summed up that there are certain positive impact from the DFC and can reduce the CO2. Yeah, you can read it, but some other implication. So the setup of these DFCs in India can be thought that the highly populated area for the Western one particularly, and the more manufacturers are located along the line, railways in the Western one. So these setups are the important factors. So yeah, this one. The high demand is essential, or in order to think about this strategy to make the shift. So yeah, it's natural, but so the if we want to think the second DFC in other countries, we have to think that how much we have the demand, and also how they are transported nowadays by trucks. Then what can be the expected benefit can be calculated. Something like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Subota. Sorry, I lost connection and I'm connecting from a different device. But may I invite Professor Puhit to share his views on the paper, please? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's an excellent paper. I have only a few observations on some of the assumptions of this paper. Otherwise, as such, there is not too much problem with some of the things can be applied for other country, for other transport corridors. And the authors have used is excellent too, because I myself, because CG modeler, I have always liked this kind of integrated approach to understand the real impact instead of a partial kind of things. Next slide, please. There's some of the comment basically of suggestion based on my ground reality experience of this comes. One of the things I think this has not been changed, because initially in the paper when I first draft, we looked from the map which was up to only done. Now on the part of the thing was done, now I can see it has been increased from Eastern corridor has been Calcutta has also been part of the Eastern Freight Corridor. So it's okay, that's my things. Only thing I think, since if you are the transport sector, why you don't to make a service sector or transport sector a separate sector in our model? Because then you can understand what the efficiency come from different kind of thing. Because now this everything is already integrated within the service sector. Because if ideally you should have a separate kind of transport sector, land transport sector, road transport sector, a separate sector in our model. Then we can see what kind of efficiency gains, what are the cost, you can better kind of policy direction, we can get it. Next slide, please. See, one of the kind of things, how you get the data at sub-regional level. Sub-regional data in India is poor. I think in the paper he has mentioned that, author has mentioned that we have used night drive data for manufacturing service sector to get estimate of regional level data, which is not really robust. We have tried to do this kind of result using GDP forecast. It doesn't work at all. So also, it is very difficult to get different kind of route-wise cost parameters. And just assuming a generic kind of values for the all over India, which may not be a good idea, I would suggest. Next slide, please. Secondly, one is think ground reality is transport cost by rail should be cheaper. Everybody agreed, no questions. But this pandemic has given a good example to real life experiment. During the pandemic, most of the passenger traffic is closed. There are no railway congestions on the route, so cargo can easily move freely. But why this has not happened? We don't see any kind of modern shift in transportation during pandemic year. So obviously it comes that this transportation is not the only kind of component why people does not prefer train. Why they prefer road over train. And these are the things we need. For example, our roadways from a down level primary data collection studies, we found that roadways along the Austin dedicated freight corridor, it takes 62 hours, buses 82 hours by railways. However, the other time in other logistic activities, like storage during transit, on the truck comes and stored on the quay, this takes more of time. As a result, sometimes there is not a very kind of, DFC may not be feasible in things. So modern shift, you may think them between, if you increase about kind of capacity, the modern shift will occur, it may not really occur in reality. At least in pandemic, we have seen that it will occur. Congestion is not the reason that people does not favor train. There are other reasons why people go for truck. Next slide, please. See, this is kind of thing I have kind to show kind of logistic time. So basically, I look at logistic times, say DFC, the same kind of starting origin and destination point. These are based on a primary data collection from logistic pair, transportation, everything. We did based on it. I did a study last 2 years back of the point-to-point cost structure. So you can see that overall, transportation part may be less in rail if you have a DFC. But other part, there is very difficult to reduce the cost. And this is the reasons time or logistic time in hours. In other parts, people usually go by road, not by lane. And how you solve this problem? Just looking at just the DFC construction is not enough. And we have to do other kind of last mile kind of connections, other kind of factors, activities. We have to look at it. Otherwise, DFC won't be a success. It may be investment, but it may not pay off. I think that is all I have to comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pohit, for the very comprehensive assessment. Actually, I wanted to mention that actually it's really this freight and logistics model is really quite commendable. I have come across, this sorts of modeling before, and these are really complex and data intensive. So kudos to Professor Zubota for this very commendable effort. And I really like Professor Pohit's comments with regards to, what happens outside of this in-transit time is also really important. I mean, the whole business process of, what is the time? What is the cost of bringing the goods from the production to the train in the first place? And what happens when it gets offloaded? So maybe on this note, let me just hand to Professor Zubota to maybe respond to some of these comments before we open to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pohit and Chan-san. Yes, we only look at the logistics improvement, so we couldn't observe or we cannot assume something additionally to the change of the business or the logistics. But it's quite similar to what I said, not 1+1, not separately, but doing together. So at the company level or at the regional level, or probably they can build the SEZ or some other logistics center having this DFC, then they can make the time much shorter or the more efficient in terms of the production side or even the delivery side. So I think that how they will use it is the second step, which can increase the impact much larger. And also in terms of the quality of data is always challenging, but we have some how to say that we cannot get the true data because no one knows it. So somehow we constructed a way to make it. So to some extent, we are a bit confident on certain sense.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Subota. We have maybe a commentary here. Perhaps I can read that out and share that. And meanwhile, let me invite the other panelists. If they have any questions for Dr. Subota's paper, please let us know. Mr. Banchaidi has actually switched on his camera. I wonder if he has a question for the Professor Subota or getting ready for the next segment. Okay, so we have Vivi Tuti, who has shared a nice thought there. She's from Java, Indonesia, and she mentioned that, you know, it's a bit of a separate topic, but I thought it's interesting. She mentioned that, you know, transportation transportation such as trains and airplanes use solar systems and batteries and low carbon for social growth. And in Indonesia, what they are increasingly doing is adapting to the pollution impacts by processing combustion products such as waste into electricity. And if there is a damaged vehicle, it will be recycled. So I thought that was just really nice to share, because I think going forward, you know, this whole idea of circular economy and waste to energy concepts, I think are really important, not just for sustainability, but, you know, how do we also shift towards nature positive outcomes? And on that note, Ranjita has her golden hand up, so please unmute yourself and share your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Subota, for your presentation. I always look forward to hearing to you. So my question is, since the beauty of, you know, this geographical data is we can crunch it at a very, you know, granular level, like regional level, and as you said, you have data on regional level. So what I understood that your estimations were at macro level, like all India level, right? So is there a way to like to further crunch it down to regional level so that we can very specifically say that, okay, because of this dedicated corridor, I mean the region is getting benefited like by this unit? That would be very interesting, and there will be the things to learn for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, what we prepared in the data is the regional level by industry, agriculture and the 5 manufacturing sector and service sector all are in it, and agricultural data made from the agricultural census of the vegetation size and some things. And actually, it can be replaced by the satellite data. So the agricultural data can be somehow used by the satellite data, but we need to have, we can see the size, but we don't know the productivity of the land. So we need to combine some estimates. But if we have such number, we can do it. On the manufacturing level, probably in India, you have a very good economic census and also annual survey of industries, which has much detailed data. So with combination of some data, each country can provide certain regional data. Probably better to have it at the state level or a bit further. In this model, we use the district data. Yeah, it's a very hard work, but we did it. Yeah, thank you. And so we can point out which region, what to do. Yeah, so that if we have certain image of a scenario that making additional load or additional customs to the neighbors or making the port better, in which sense? How many hours of the reduction of the waiting time, or what kind of proposal or scenario do you want to do you want to implement? If you have certain numbers on the scenario, we can check the impact, how large it is. So this time we only did the domestic scenario. So if the JN port in Mumbai, if they improved substantially in some sense, then we can consider how these flow of imports or export can change the Indian economy. Is feasible.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Supporter. I see Professor Pohit has his video on. Did you want to share some insights with us, Professor Pohit?
No, as such, nothing. I think actually we look at this kind of study of the point-to-point port-wise wide. I would ask, you can go around my study and see, you can use parameters. I can give you cost parameter by different route-wise. So you can use this parameter, you can modify your model, etc. These are available in public domain. So it can get more realistic figure. But only thing my problem is that anything at district level, there is data is not there. You are making astrology, I would say. Below astrology, because you are going below district you can do, but you are talking below district level. You really can't. District data is very poor in India.
Thank you very much. I was very much impressed on your prior study, and I briefly checked the link. So I will ask the Google to get it. Soon, probably I will send you another comment or some suggestion, asking some suggestion. So it's great
Any
to
data,
see you here.
etc. I can share with you. Any data you want, I can share it. No problem.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we have a question from Mr. Tomi Hondartomo. And the question is, are there any other policies in India besides the use of CNG to reduce emissions in the transportation sector, such as the consumption of biodiesel and bioethanol? Anyone from the panel, please raise your golden hand and unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Thank
actually,
you.
there is a policy. I think India is using 10% blending. There is a target of 20% blending of biofuel, or for diesel as well as petrol. That is the target now. Around, I think 26 or so is the target. 2026 is the date. Or we have to go for a 20% blending target for diesel as well as petrol.
Thank you. Now, actually, since both your presentations, both your papers were a little bit on modeling, and with models, you need data. One of the things that we have been struggling with actually on some of our projects, particularly in the past year, is collecting data. I mean, of course, in this pandemic, we're not actually in the same room, we're in the same virtual room even. So, collecting data is a real challenge. And we've been thinking about, how do we deploy advanced technology in helping us to collect data? And I just wanted to hear, what are your thoughts on that, given, things like Internet of Things, sensors, and all that are becoming cheaper, more cost effective. What are your thoughts on, greater deployment of these, alternative ways to create big data and analytics to support your predictive modeling? Any thoughts?
If I add something, yeah, so
Sure.
the big data are ready, but not in our hands yet. But for that opportunity, firstly, we need to make the data safe. So that if everyone can touch the data, it's very dangerous in other sense. So if these things are clear, then probably we can. So But in many kind of the administrative data, the data are already accumulated. So somehow all of the impacts of the COVID can be analyzed using the stored data, which are not yet available, but probably available after some years. So we can wait for a moment and think about the event.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Subota, Professor Pohit. And with this, maybe let's wrap up and move on to our country presentation by Mr. Bonchaidi. I'm so sorry, I don't have my, because my laptop crashed midway. But I believe maybe if we can show the presentation, please. I think, thank you very much, Mr. Bonchaidi. You may start. Thank you.
Firstly, I would like to say good afternoon for distinguished participants. In this session, I would like to share about. Sorry. Okay. Are you? In this session, I would like to share about my experience about the greenhouse gas mitigation and energy policy of Thailand. Next slide, please. About the forecast, the national climate action of Thailand. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. In 2015, my Prime Minister announced about the Thailand climate action target we call NDC, nationally determined contribution. We would like to reduce the greenhouse gas around 20% to 25% when you compare with the 2030 business as usual in terms of energy sector, transport sector, industrial process sector, waste sector, and agriculture also. Next slide, please. About the Thailand NDC roadmap 2021 to 2030. After a year of 2015, we collaborate together with another ministry and another department to set the roadmap of the NDC target. We call NDC roadmap of Thailand. We include the three biggest sector about the sector have a more potential and high potential to reduce greenhouse gas. Firstly, energy sector and transport sector is the first and most set of greenhouse gas reduction potential. Another one, waste sector. Waste sector have a more co-benefit about reduce the waste in Thailand and transform to change the disposal process in Thailand also. And last one, IPPU sector. We would like to promote about the hydraulic cement. Hydraulic cement can reduce the calcium carbonate in the cement producing process also. That's why we set the three sector: energy and transport, IPPU sector, and waste sector. Next slide, please. In this preparation phase of the NDC action plan, after we set the NDC roadmap, we study and propose the deep detail of the action plan of NDC. We collaborate around the 5 focal point of the sectoral focal points, such as the energy policy and planning office. They respond about the energy sector. OTP, Office of Transport and Traffic Policy. They respond about the transport sector. Also, the Pollution Control Department. They respond about the waste sector. And another one, Department of Industrial Waste. They respond about the IPPU sector. in terms of the national focal point, ONEP, Office of Natural Resources and Environmental Policy and Planning, we call ONEP. There is the national focal point of Thailand. In my office, my office, Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization is technical support of the ONEP and another office to calculate, to set up in terms of the greenhouse gas reduction. That's why we brief very shortly about the like a term and overview of the Thailand NDC. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. In this early year, we set a new one about the climate policy that is related to about the national energy policy. We call the carbon neutral framework of Thailand. Ministry of Energy collaborate with the Ministry of Natural Resources to study and to propose about how Thailand go to meet about the target of carbon neutrality country. Next slide, please. In about the national energy policy, we have about the target, 3 targets. First, we promote about the clean energy technology and carbon neutral policy by years of 2065 to 2070. That is because of we non-NX1 country, we meet about the target of 2 degree scenario. That's why we cannot. I think I can say we cannot because of in terms of the detail and data, everything about that I try to calculate. Right? We cannot meet the carbon neutrality before 2050 if we have no potential of the CCS carbon capture and storage. And second target, we would like to increase the competitiveness potential of the low carbon investment and the economic value, such as the East Economic Corridor of Thailand, we call EEC corridor. We would like to set like a smart city, green industrial cities like that, and green industrial estate like that. And third target, we would like to support the long-term strategy of low emission development of Thailand because of under the Paris Agreement, because of energy sector of Thailand is a share of emission around 70 to 75. That's why the energy policy and national energy policy would like to support the long-term strategy of the greenhouse gas emission reduction under the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. In terms of national energy policy direction, in the first one, I would like to increase the proportion of new power plants at least 50% to be the renewable energy power plant. And also we include the energy storage system called ESS because of reliable of the energy of Thailand. We would like to include the energy storage system together with the RE power plant also. And second direction, we promote the electricity vehicle or EV at least 30% by year 2030. And also promote the green energy transport, increasing energy efficiency for reduce greenhouse gas in transport sector. And the third direction, we increase the energy efficiency more than 50%, but now we promote about the energy efficiency around 20%. That's why we increase more than 10% to about the energy efficiency plan of Thailand. by we would like to use the innovation technology of the energy management, such as smart grid system of like that. And the fourth direction, we would like to promote about the energy transition under the concept we call 4D1E. Next slide, please. What is the 4D1E of Thailand energy policy? Firstly, we call it digitalization. The secondly, decarbonization. Thirdly, decentralization. And fourthly, deregulation. And the 1E is rectification. This is the framework and overview of the energy policy to support the long-term strategy of climate change of Thailand that we would like to be the carbon neutrality country after 2060 to 2065 to 2070. That is all of my sharing presentation about the Thailand climate action under the energy policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bonchaidi. I really liked your presentation. I received a message that you might need to leave soon. Can I know how many minutes more you have with us?
Okay, please, if you have a question, please feel free. I have time. I have a little bit time.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe to give our audience a little bit more time for their questions to come through, and also our panelist speakers, please send us through your questions. But meanwhile, maybe I can reflect a little bit on the presentation, which I felt was really helpful and really timely. And I think what was really impressive about the NDC that you have shared with us, Mr. Bonchaidi, that it's clearly it is cross-sectoral. And it just underlies the whole kind of like the importance that, you know, there needs to be integrated and comprehensive approach in tackling this overall, you know, decarbonization. And I just wanted to maybe get some of your views also. I mean, you know, we're in this pandemic, and a lot of government's budgets are going into the responding and recovery process. I mean, how has these, you know, aspirations towards, you know, these Paris alignment and long-term decarbonization, has that been impacted, interrupted during this pandemic? And what has been the approach to this?
Sure. About the pandemic, I think if you would like to boost up not boost up not vaccine boost up, I mean boost up the about the economic of Thailand. It's not easy if you use only the green technology, because of the cost effectiveness is very high. That's why I try to step up and to reduce the impact of economic Thailand. That's like that we promote about the REC. I'm not sure you know REC, about the renewable energy certificate, to support.
It's a bit difficult.
To support about the like a prosumer. That's why we call the decentralization and deregulation, because of we need to promote about the RE prosumer power plant. That's why self-dependence, not about the only centralized, but about the central government only. That's why I think this is the important if you would like to pass through the pandemic period in terms of the clean energy and green development of Thailand.
I see. Okay. And what advice would you share with other countries in terms of from the Thailand's, you know, learning experience from this in coming up with this whole decarbonization strategy? What do you feel were some of the important factors in coming up with such a comprehensive and cross-sector plan? What is the, you know, secret of the success in coming up with this plan?
I think this is a collaborate between the government and private sector and people sector. That is important. We try to collaborate via first sector, three sector. Yeah, I think it's not the top secret. It's only the that you say secret.
Yes, yes. So collaborative approach is important.
Yeah,
Okay.
we try to explain about the private sector to understand how to set a green development like this, and government I can say to subsidize something to pass through the pandemic and to meet the green target like that.
Thank you very much, Bunchaidi. So we have two hands that have come up. First from Dina, if you could unmute yourself and share your question, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your great presentation about policies in Thailand. I was impressed with ambitious targets in Thailand, like you said, 30% of electric vehicles, right, by 2030.
Yeah.
So how do you think this will be achieved if government planning like subsidize electric vehicle or you have local production? How do you think this will be achieved?
Now we reduce the tax, like an excise tax of an EV car. That's why to help maybe to help to promote about the EV, like low emission car, like I can say about label of the low emission car to reduce the excise tax now. But I'm not sure in this next 10 years what is the measure to promote the EV. And I'm not sure because this is only the framework and scope to study and to set we can say about the action plan maybe in the next year 2022 we set about the detail of the EV promotion process like that.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you very much for
Bunchaidi.
your question.
And thank you, Dina. And Ranjita, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I would like to learn more about the governance process in determining these goals. So what is the level of localization of policy and involvement of regional government and other stakeholders while you formulate these targets and policies? Thank you.
Okay, I cannot hear clearly. Sorry. Okay.
Okay, I'll repeat my question. I'm sorry, I was not very clear. So I want to learn more about the process of these formulations and the involvement of other stakeholders, especially regional government and private sector. Thank you.
Firstly, in my experience, government to study and set up by like a lecturer in the university, also like put just only technical term to set about the framework and maybe deep detail. And second process is to like a public hearing. Firstly, I would like to hear about the top private sector before. What do you think? What do you need to something like that? And the last one is about the people sector to understand and like about the communication like that to understand why we need to be and to meet the target of the green policy in terms of the energy sector like that. Thank you for your question.
Okay.
Okay. I think I have limited time. Thank you very much. And it's my honor of ADBI again. After 10 years ago, I have a present about the Thailand mitigation action at Hong Kong. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bunchaidi, for your generous sharing and also for everyone who has been generously, sharing your thoughts and questions on this topic. So Yeah, so we've heard a range of topics today, from policy interventions to, modeling economic, environmental impacts, and wrapping up with the country context, where we see how different levers are combined in a country context. So I really hope that this has been insightful takeaways for everyone. And hopefully this will facilitate shifts towards low carbon future in your respective roles. So with this, let me close this particular session and hand everyone back to Nella. Thank you very much, Nella, and thank you everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you very much, for managing session 3, and transport sector playing an important role in reducing GHG emission. I think because this is one of a big contributor to GHG emission, and then we can feel the difference, the impact, the reduction of transport activity during this COVID-19. So, and the session 3 explained to us very clearly, and then Pamela make it like very interactively. So now we will move to the session 4, but we will take a break so you can stretch your leg and take some drinks. So we will have a 5 minutes or 20-minute break. 50, I think, yeah, okay. We will come back 5:15 Japan time. So 17 minutes from now. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and see you again in 5:15 p.m. Tokyo time. Okay, thank you and welcome back, everyone. So we move to our session 4. We already have our moderator available. Thank you, Dr. Priyanta. He is Chief of Energy Sector Group from Asian Development Bank in the Department Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department from ADBI. And he was also the founder of Director General of the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka and a senior professor of electrical engineering at the University of Moratuwa, Sri Lanka. Without further ado, I give the floor to Dr. Wijayatunggal.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And welcome to this session 4 on where we will look at the energy specific interventions in relation to effective greenhouse gas emission control policies. So it's an energy specific session, and in this session we have 4 presentations, and 2 of the papers are certain specific subject areas, and there will be 2 discussions for that. For those 2 papers, and then we have 2 country presentations, one from India, another one from Malaysia. So that's the format of the this is how we are going to run the session. We will have presentations. After each of the presentations, we will have the discussion whenever there is a discussion, and then we have Q&A opened up. And for the country presentations, of course, just after country presentations, we'll have Q&A straight away. And for the presenters, please confine your presentations strictly to 15 minutes. And then we will have a 10-minute discussion through the discussions, where you have the discussions. And it's the same which is applied to the other 2 presentations. And then we will have Q&A as appropriate. So with those few remarks, and thank you very much for the presenters and the audience for joining this session. And let me now straight away go to the first presentation. Now this is going to be paper presented on decarbonization policies and energy price reforms in Bangladesh, dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model. And this is going to be presented by Dr. Saqib Amin, Associate Professor from the Department of Economics, School of Business and Economics, North South University, Bangladesh. With that short introduction, let me hand over to Dr. Amin to proceed. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, very much.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much to all of you, distinguished government officials, session chair, and discussions and other listeners. My name is Saqib Amin, and I am an associate professor in the School of Business and Economics at North South University, Bangladesh. The title of my today's presentation is Decarbonization Policies and Energy Price Reforms in Bangladesh. This is a joint paper with Dr. Laura Marciliani and Dr. Thomas Wenstrom from Durham University Business School, and Professor Tura Jamshab and Dr. Manuel Lorca from Copenhagen Business School. We'd like to express our sincere gratitude to the ADBI for inviting us in this workshop on effective greenhouse gas emission control policies. Next slide, please. Thank you. As you all know, Bangladesh, a country in northeastern part of South Asia, has made significant progress over the last 1 decade from the socio-economic perspective. For example, increased per capita income level, life expectancy has increased, literacy rate, poverty reduction. All these are showing some sort of improvements for the last few years. If you look at the data, we can see that Bangladesh economy grew by 7% on an average since 2010, and extreme poverty actually was reduced to 10.5% in 2009, which was 32% 10 years back. Now, the country is known as the new Asian tiger for its remarkable development and becomes a role model for the other Asian countries. With an objective of becoming a high-income nation by 2041 and to end extreme poverty by 2030, Bangladesh now looks forward to sustained economic growth. In 2021, in fact this year, the United Nations Committee for Development Policy, CDP, has recommended the graduation of Bangladesh from the category of LDC as it satisfied the eligibility standards in terms of per capita income, human resources, economic, environmental, vulnerability for the second consecutive time since 2018. And we believe that energy sector plays a very important role in achieving this landmark success. Next slide, please. Thank you. However, the energy crisis remained one of the unresolved challenges for Bangladesh since its independence in 1971 because of the scarcity of fossil fuel resources, poor operational and maintenance issues, lack of trained human resources, and low number of electricity plants. Therefore, the government actually decided to open up the energy market and issued the Private Power Generation Policy Act in 1996. When the present government came into power in 2009, they indeed faced two major problems in the energy sector. Firstly, the economy was not reaching to its full potential, due to an inadequate supply of electricity. During 2009, what we have seen, electricity demand always exceeded supply by around 2,000 megawatts on an average. Secondly, the country faced too much reliance on the natural gas, as more than 90% of the electricity was generated by using the natural gas until 2009. The main reform programs that included in the policy agendas in Bangladesh are as follows. You can see, for example, restructuring the core power utilities, establishing the independent regulatory authorities, which is the Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission in 2003. We encourage the private companies, firms, for example, independent power producers, IPPs, captive power producers, to enter in the generation market. We have allowed the privately owned quick rental power companies, as a quick and short-term solution to mitigate the then persistent electricity crisis. We try to strengthen the fuel diversification policies in the energy generation, electricity generation mix. We wanted to revise the energy prices, to ensure the cost reflective pricing, and also promoting the uses of renewable energy in addition to improve the energy efficiency. Next slide, please. Here you can see that all these initiatives have played a crucial role in strengthening the Bangladesh energy sector. For instance, we have now 134 power plants as compared to 27 back in 2009. Accessibility to electricity has also been increased from 47% in 2009 to 97% in 2010, and we are actually achieving to 100% electrification by the end of 2021. And you can also see the clear sign of improvements in this slide in terms of the stylized facts. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, actually, we went through a rigorous reform initiatives, okay? And for example, the government introduced the quick rental power plants in 2010, as I have mentioned earlier. The policy of introducing these quick rental power plants has been a success by providing an intermittent electricity supply. However, if we look at the newspapers and other articles, we can see there are some sort of controversies regarding the uses of these quick rental power plants. For instance, these quick rental power plants burn oil to generate electricity, and the use of imported liquid fuel has increased from around 5% in 2009 to 34% in 2020. And if you look at the last 10 years figure, I mean, between 2009 to 2019, the average share of oil in the electricity generation in Bangladesh was 24.34%. This reached to a peak of 32.39% in 2019. And obviously, the total value of imported liquid fuel has also increased nearly 2 times in the last 10 years. And more importantly, since the government provides actually oil at a subsidized rate to the rental power generators in order to protect them from the oil price volatility, the size of fuel subsidies also soared during this time period. Experts also argue that the government's public expenditure budget to some extent is inefficiently allocated. The average generation cost of electricity has increased from 6.2 taka, the local currency per kilowatt hour, in 2018 from 2.62 in 2009, almost 3 times higher in the last 10 years. And as mentioned, government are forced to provide subsidy to the marginalized electricity consumers. So subsidy is given to the generators, also to the marginalized consumers. So the cost of energy subsidies in Bangladesh is 5% of the total GDP in 2018, where the petroleum products and electricity accounted for nearly 90% of these energy subsidies. And this increased share of oil in electricity generation mix has led to a boost in CO2 emission in Bangladesh. Around 94.26 million tons of CO2 were released in Bangladesh in 2009, of which 23.11 million tons are from oil consumption. Due to this remarkable expansion of the share of oil in electricity generation, oil-based CO2 on an average increased by 12.09% since 2016, which is well above the average growth rate of 8.39% of the last 11 years. So no doubt there is evident that in order to achieve the objectives of energy security and the access to electricity, like many other developing and emerging economies, Bangladesh governments also distort the energy markets by controlling the energy prices. And as discussed earlier, this is often achieved by keeping electricity prices below the full economic cost to aid consumers who could not otherwise afford the electricity, and very often by subsidizing fuel costs to support the energy generation. In turn, energy market distortions have the potential to translate in high greenhouse gas emissions, jeopardizing sustainable development goals and commitment to the Paris Agreement on climate change. Next slide, please. Thank you. These market distortions also prevent the optimization of the fuel mix in electricity production, to some extent promote overconsumption of fossil fuels, and ultimately delay the transition towards the sustainable development and clean energy. Therefore, the Bangladesh government has recently emphasized the importance of energy pricing policy for the environmental protection, as reflected in the Perspective Plan 2041. This perspective plan states that all fossil fuels should be priced as to eliminate subsidy. The plan also includes the recommendation to adopt carbon taxes to reduce carbon emissions from the use of fossil fuel and promote clean investment, with the overarching goal to ensure consistency between the country's power and energy development strategy and environmental protection. Furthermore, in September 2016, actually, Bangladesh ratified the 2015 UNFCCC Paris Agreement, pledging a GHG emission decreases of 15% from the business as usual level by 2030. 5% reduction would be achieved unconditionally, while 10% would be conditional on receiving technical and financial support from the global community. Therefore, being highly vulnerable to climate change risks, and despite contributing less than 0.35% of the total global GHG emissions, Bangladesh has set an target and a shining example in the fight against global warming. Next slide, please. In this paper, we developed a dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model for Bangladesh economy, which is the extension of the previously developed model by Amin and Marciliani 2015. Actually, in this model, we incorporate the assumption of the price setting mechanism, the first kind of model, energy augmented dynamic model for Bangladesh economy. And we try to simulate several decarbonization policies where the government introduced carbon taxes, removes the fossil fuel subsidies given to the electricity powers, and allows electricity to be traded in a market where all the producers face the same energy prices and there are no fossil fuel subsidies. Next slide. Thank you. The model economy, our model economy has the following four sectors. The production sectors, as you can see from the slide, industry and service production sector, who produce final output using labor capital. We also consider electricity as an additional input. Secondly, the energy sector, where we consider the public power producers, the independent power producers, the rental power producers, and who produce electricity using the either natural gas or imported oil. We also have the household sectors, who receives utility from consumption goods and leisure and pays taxes to the government. And there is also a public sector, the government, who wants revenue from taxes and provides subsidies to the energy consumers and the producers. So in the next slide, you will see the conceptual framework of this model. Can you please move on to the next slide? The details of the modeling aspect you can find from the paper, and I'm also happy to share. But here we can just share the conceptual model. You can see like the public generators, quick rentals, IPP, they are feeding electricity to the national grid, and the service sector, household industry can get electricity from the national grid, contributing to the GDP. Next slide. We use a software Dyna, the version 4.4.3, to calibrate and simulate the benchmark model for the Bangladesh economy, where electricity is traded at a government regulated prices, and where subsidies also provided to the energy electricity generators with no carbon taxes. And then we compare the long run steady state values of different economic variables under the three scenarios as mentioned earlier, to assess the consequences of energy price reforms and carbon taxes on the different environmental and macroeconomic indicators. So in the experiment one, we have considered $5 and $30 per ton of CO2 carbon taxes and return all revenues to the household. In experiment two, we have a model economy where the government removes all fossil fuel subsidies provided to the electricity producer And in experiment 3, we consider a model economy where electricity is traded, where all generators face the same electricity prices. In addition to the fossil fuel subsidy removals and the introduction of carbon tax in the experiment 1. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the slide which contains the main findings of actually experiment and this paper. The steady state values of the model you can see are listed in this slide. In experiment 1, so we have actually two categories, like in experiment 1, you can see $5 per ton of CO2 and $30 per ton of CO2. So if you can see, actually a carbon tax of $5 causes a reduction in electricity generation by the quick rental farms using oil of 4.4% and the private IPP farms using gas of 4.7%. Okay, and if you introduce $30, the magnitude will be even getting higher. Since electricity prices are fixed and government increases production by 1.3% in order to clear the energy market. Otherwise, we have sort of disequilibrium. A reduction in oil imports improves the trade balance, so less of the industrial good needs to be exported. Industrial production falls by 0.03%, still allowing for a general consumption increases of 0.08%. This for the $5. As I mentioned, for the $30, it is even higher. The carbon tax generates the revenue transferred to the household, so both service consumption and electricity consumption increases by 0.02% and 0.08% respectively. And due to expansion of the service sector, GDP increases by 0.06%. As the economy also shifts from oil to gas, CO2 emissions fall by 0.02%. If we look at the findings of the second experiment, where we are removing the fossil fuel subsidies, this is increasing the GDP by 0.38%, general goods consumption by 0.56%, and total electricity production by 0.42% at the steady state level. The sector using oil of electricity generation shrinks by 18.13%, and the private sector using natural gas also shrinks by 10.35% because these are now taxed. Government is imposing taxes on the fossil fuels. As a result, CO2 emissions fall by 1.15%. Thus, in terms of the CO2 emissions, removing the fossil fuel subsidy seems to be more effective than a $5 carbon tax. The reason is that oil is subsidized relatively more than the natural gas. So removing the price distortions actually reduce the use of oil, which causes these results, and also due to the formulation of the model. In the final experiment, when the phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies is combined with the price reform on the producer side, that is, producers facing the same electricity price, further efficiency gains can be obtained as the economy moves towards the unregulated electricity market as a move towards the free market economy. In particular, we find an increase in household good consumption by 0.82%, an increase in electricity production by 0.62%, and the GDP increased by 0.61% at the steady state level. Due to this price reform, electricity price for generators using oil is lowered, results in a substantial reduction in the electricity generation by those producers to natural gas. This makes CO2 emissions to fall by 4.57%, nearly double the effect of introducing a $30 carbon tax. Next slide.
Dr. Amin, can you wrap up soon?
Yes. So our results suggest that although all proposed policies can benefit the economy and the environment, the policy of removing The fossil fuel subsidies and intersectoral electricity price distortions at the same time provide the highest benefits. Therefore, the most important policy recommendations emerging from this paper is for the government to enable an electricity market with fewer price distortions. Only when these distortions are removed, the government may consider the implementations of a carbon tax to achieve further reduction of CO2 emissions. This paper also reveals that the highest reduction in CO2 emission of 4.57%, as mentioned, achieved under a regime with lower electricity price distortions, would already position Bangladesh towards fulfilling its Paris Agreement pledge of an unconditional 5% reduction in the GSG. Furthermore, a carbon tax has the additional benefit to generate revenues. In our paper, we return all revenues to household in lump sum fashion, although different ways of recycling revenues could be modeled. And our example would be the implementation of double dividend policies, where tax revenues are used to decrease the existing rates of discretionary taxation, such as labor tax, and to generate a win-win situation between economy and the environment. Okay, we like to extend the model by incorporating the heterogeneous feature of the household level to get more clear picture how this gonna affect the poor and rural household. Okay, so let me stop here. So thank you very much for your attention and for listening to me. I welcome any suggestion, question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amin, for that excellent but quick presentation. Let me now request Dr. Kenmei Subota, professor in Faculty of Global and Regional Studies, Toyo University, Japan, to discuss the paper. Thank you. Over to you, Professor.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Good.
Very well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, it was a very interesting paper, and I'm also how to say, I also work on Bangladesh, so I'm very glad to see this analysis. And in simple, or what this paper examined is these three scenarios: carbon tax, removal of the fossil fuel subsidies, and removal of the distortion in the market. And let me skip the because he has already explained the detail of the following. And then, so probably I may point one more setup. So there are industry, services, and the government, and the energy sector, and the household. We don't have the agriculture, but then agriculture may not use the energy intensively, so probably fine. But yeah, need to point out. And then another important part is that the energy sector is pretty much a Bangladeshi specific setup. It's very good. The gas produced from the public and private, and or by private. And gas are domestically produced and all are imported is another important feature. And yeah, so let me go to the cover the scenario. First, the carbon tax. This is two scenarios, $5 or $30. And we see the result. And then the removal of the fuel subsidies and price reform. But probably I have to say that the experiment 3 is a combination with the experiment 2. So the removing the distortion and removing the subsidy. So I would say that the 2 + 3 or before that, I think it may be better to see the pure contribution of the price reform. As I say later, possibly that the price reform is quite a drastic change, like the privatization of the governmental production, because they also face the same price with the private sector. So yeah, since the political will need to be very strong, so yeah, it would be clearer if we can have all scenario differently. But the beauty of this simulation analysis is that we can combine several scenarios. So I would be grateful if I can compare the 2, 3, and both together in a different way. And in terms of the result, I wondered that why not show it in the percentage by benchmarking the benchmark. It would be clear. So this is the one I would say. And clearly, with the carbon tax, it has a reduction, and with higher price, it has further reduction. And compared to the fossil fuel, it has larger impact. So instead of taxing, removing the fossil fuel is a very big impact. Sounds very encouraging, I thought. And then this one need to be compared on top of the second scenario. So possibly the removing the price distortion would have about 3% of the contribution if I subtract this contribution. So yeah, in this way, what kind of combination may be better can be discussed if you separate them. But it's very good to know that how this shift may happen. Yeah. And then why this shift may happen is that primarily the consumption, energy generation coming from the oil are shifting to the gas production is the main message or scenario or behind this result. So the I forgot. So somehow the governmental production increase and these two decline is the main point. So, but if it happens so, it has some fear from the economist view that it may promote the monopoly situation or kind of the big change of the energy market. So yeah, the generation and the delivery in the energy sector, probably that it is a hard topic to separate them out, or how we can allow the private sector in it. So it comes back to what does it mean on the scenario is the point. And so the third one has a bit more discussion that what do you mean specifically is my thing. So my question. So can we think that it's a privatization of the governmental energy producer, or the movement of the agent is a bit regulated, or somehow in a way you think so? And after the deregulation, it may go to the monopoly market by the ex-governmental organization or oligopoly style. Then how do you think? How do you see? It's a bit more practical possibly, but since it's not a competitive market, you need to imagine somehow the realistic future plan, I guess. And then, so this point I have already told you. And on the result, another point, I don't know much about the CGE, but when I think about the dynamics, does it make some change if we change the timing or the order of the policy installment? 1, 2, 3 means that 1 and 2nd and 3. So or 1, 2, 3 together. When we discuss the combination of the scenario, when it comes in, it can be another discussion. So after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, if there is no time dimension, it's another point. But if there are any past dependency, you can also argue on this point. But possibly it's specific to your model, so you can you don't have to discuss it. But and then production of IPP electricity generation decline in all cases. Yeah, I read the result, and then why does production of the government electricity increase even in the case of price reform? So probably energy shift from oil to the gas is shown. Yeah, I told. And is it technically feasible at a prevailing price? And when I think that the goodness of the oil-generated energy is that when blackout happens, we can make it, right? So such a demand is very high in certain setup. So, and then I don't know the frequency of blackouts, but sometimes it could happen. So then this uncertainty is another source of the demand for the oil generation, oil generated energy. So yeah, it's another topic logic, or it's one assumption that you may not looking at. Maintaining the subsidy for gas shall keep the distortion in price and the burden of the public expenditure. However, the removal of this subsidy shall make the consumption of oil-generated electricity increased. Yeah, but yeah, let me skip it. And then, so finally 3 points: switching cost, the merit of oil generation. I think I have told you. So that it's related to the backup for the blackouts, and it's quite important for the consumers and people staying in the hotels, possibly. And then which option may be politically acceptable? The third one, experiment 3, sounds good for the environment, but sound awkward to the politicians or someone related to the energy sector. So yeah, how do you see it? It was something interesting because on the paper, it was written that this subsidy is consisting 90% of all the subsidy. Sounds huge. And then in a quite different point, yeah, it was discussed that how the domestic market reform can change the consumption of the energy. But yeah, is there any possibility already discussed or enforced about the regional integration of the energy consumption? So buying some energy from India or Bhutan or, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, probably if it's connected, it's possible. Maybe not yet. So is it feasible or competitive producer for the energy? I don't know. So it would be great to know. That's all. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. Dr. Amin, would you like to quickly respond? We have a few minutes, not a long. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Kemenus. It's a very, very excellent review, I must need to say, actually. So thank you very much. I would like to incorporate all of your comments in the revised version of the paper. So just, I am replying a few of the comments that I have been able to note down. So regarding the agricultural sector, we have incorporated the agricultural sector, but the result is not reported, in the computational exercise that goes into the parameter. So we had the agricultural sector in the model, which is 18% of the total GDP. Next, regarding the issue of the subsidy withdrawal. So what we are actually proposing, it's better if you can actually introduce the revenue neutral subsidy program, and we have to create awareness within the consumers. Otherwise, it would be very, very difficult to get rid of this subsidy. Somehow the government has to convince the people whatever we are doing is for your better future welfare. Okay, I completely agree with you regarding the tabular format. Result should be present in the percentage. So by the time I realized, actually I submitted the presentation, so I stick with that one. But definitely you're 100% right. Now regarding the due to the introduction of this sort of reform initiatives, you have mentioned why the quick rental production and the IPP, which is the independent power producers, actually reduce their production. In fact, what is our argument? And due to the modeling purposes, since this is a price setting mechanism model where the government controls the energy prices, so when there is any sort of price rise, the relative price of the other resources is getting higher. So that's why in the computational exercise, they're forced to actually reduce their electricity supply. Then what happens, actually government has to intervene in the market to clear the energy market. So that's why any sort of market reforms is going to reduce the production of the quick rentals and the independent power producers, and government has to intervene to clear the market. And to clear the market, that software gives us a result which is 3.2 taka per kilowatt hour. So that is the price which needs to be charged by the government to clear the market. So that is the optimal price as reflected in the software. And you have also mentioned regarding the competitive market. Yes, this is a a very big challenge ahead of the country. We need to introduce the competitive market practice, but I think it will take some time to actually go on that direction. But our government is actually trying. So far, all the reform initiatives have been devoted towards the generation sector, but now they are trying to focus on the transmission and distribution sector. We have also mentioned about the blackout system loss, something like that. Actually, that is also incorporated in the model, but not reported in this version. We have used a parameter. Okay, so we also have the results in terms of the blackouts system loss, and there is no significant difference in terms of the steady state result. And regarding the backup plan, in fact, we have another published paper in the ADBI working paper, a captive power plant. So around 18% of the electricity generation is produced from the captive power plants, because a few of the industries, the hotels, the service sector, previously they did not actually have that much trust towards the grid connectivity due to this, security uncertainty. So actually, captive power plants as a backup generation is already there, and we have a different paper on that.
Dr. Amit, shall we quickly wrap up, because I think we have to move on. There was one question from the audience, that is why the government is still subsidizing fossil fuels instead of focusing on energy efficiency and renewables. Of course, keep that in mind. You can type it in the question and answer session, answer window. And I have my own question, because I used to work in Bangladesh energy sector for a long time before I moved to energy sector group. And that question is actually, do you think the government can carry on these subsidies for gas, considering all this depletion of its own gas resources and importation of LNG, and how we are going to look at that, and also the regional cooperation, which now the government is looking at importing power from Nepal to Bangladesh and Bhutan to Bangladesh, and how that plays out in your model, how everything moves on as you go. So I don't expect these answers, but something which you can incorporate in your eventual finalization of the paper. Thank you very much, Dr. Amin. Because of the time constraint, I would go for the next presenter. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much for the excellent discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is going to be on renewable energy certificates trading in India, a decade in review. And the presenter is Dr. Aparna Soni, and Professor, Center of International Trade and Development from Jawaharlal Nehru University, India. Let me hand over to Professor Aparna to make the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to share my research. And without further ado, since I have just 15 minutes, I will start. So today my discussion would be on the market-based instrument of renewable energy certificates trading, which was started a little more than a year ago. Next slide, please. So I would begin with a very quick review of India's domestic and multilateral commitments on climate change to give a perspective. And then again, very briefly touch upon the policy instruments that India has used to enhance renewables in the energy mix. I would touch upon the regulatory and legislative framework under which this has been done. Again, just mention it. I'll then get into very quickly the renewable energy credits, the REC market performance over the last 10 years, 2011 through 2020. In fact, after 2020, the trading has been suspended. And I will finally conclude with some observations on the new proposal that the Ministry of Power has put forward in June 2021 on redesigning the REC market. Next slide, please. So one of the most comprehensive policy packages that India put forward was the National Action Plan on Climate Change, which was adopted in 2008. It is a package which essentially has 8 missions, which targets to reduce carbon emissions and essentially move India to a low carbon path. And in particular, it addresses sectors, including manufacturing sectors, identifying industries which are energy intensive, which would be promoting energy efficiency through, there also they had a market-based instrument called the Perform, Act and essentially Trade, the PAT system, and Perform, Achieve and Trade. And there is otherwise a clear movement towards changing the mix of energy towards zero carbon emission energy, which is the renewables and non-fossil fuel based. So my focus would be on the renewables focus that India has had, and in particular, referring to the National Action Plan on Climate Change, it proposed a dynamic minimum renewable purchase obligation for the grid, where beginning 2009-10, about 5% of the total grid purchase of power would be renewable based, and it would be jacked up by 1% every year for the next 10 years. So technically by 2020, we should have seen about 15% of the grid power to be based on renewables. One of the missions within the National Action Plan was exclusively devoted to solar energy development. The National Action Plan spoke of other forms of renewables as well, wind and biomass, but an exclusive focus was given on solar to essentially increase solar energy in the grid. And in 2015, in India's intended nationally determined contribution submitted under the Paris Agreement, it set a target of 40% share of the total installed electricity capacity to be based on non-fossil fuel by the year 2030. Next slide, please. In 2019, in New York, India announced a goal of 450 gigawatts of installed capacity of renewable energy by 2030. Now, so this was what is happening in terms of India's announced commitments at the international level. The domestic side also saw commitments and interim goal setting or target setting. And the target that was set for 2030 was broken up into 2022 and then going ahead at 2030. Focusing on what was set for 2022, it was supposed to be 175 gigawatts of cumulative renewable power capacity, of which 100 gigawatts would be of solar, 60 of wind, 10 of biomass, and 5 of small hydro. Large hydro, of course, is not being considered as renewables because of ecological costs which are entailed. And in terms of the generation, not just the installed capacity, the renewable purchase obligation was notified or has been notified and periodically notified by the Ministry of Power. And the table here shows the annual targets which were set. And we have here since 2016-17 going on to 2021-22. I would actually particularly highlight the target which was set for 2019-2020, because when I actually show you the actual data of what has been attained, we have data until 2019-2020. So essentially the target for 2019-2020, that is the financial year for India, was 17.5% of total renewables, non-solar being 10.25 and solar being 7.25. So non-solar would of course have, as I said earlier, the small hydro, biomass, and wind. Next, please. The underlying regulatory and legislative changes began in India about 2 decades ago. in particular for the electricity sector, beginning with the Electricity Act of 2003, the National Tariff Policy, and so on and so forth, which essentially laid down rules for enhancing or bringing in mandatory notifications for having renewables within the grid. It mandated that the states, and there are 30 plus, to promote grid connectivity of renewable-based power. So in the power sector, both the center as well as the state have administrative powers, but essentially it is implemented at the state level, guidelines being given at the center level. The instruments of accelerated depreciation has been a very popular instrument which enhanced the capacity building in wind and solar and so on and so forth. Then we had the generation-based incentives, which was trying to increase the generation after the capacity building. We had the preferential feed-in tariffs, the renewable purchase obligations, which I already mentioned. And then there is this tradable renewable energy certificates. So within the National Action Plan in 2008 itself, there was mention of giving flexibility in attaining the renewable purchase obligation by which each of the states would have to have a certain minimum share of the grid electricity to be renewable. And knowing that states have very diverse endowments of renewable resources, it allowed for the flexibility that if there were states which were low in terms of the resource endowment of either wind or sun or biomass or running river for small hydro, then it would actually be purchasing the renewable energy certificates from states which were richly endowed and would have excess renewables being produced. The REC scheme was actually launched after the CERC, which is the Central Electrical Regulatory Commission of India at the central level, laid down the regulations in 2010. And the REC scheme itself was started and the auctioning started in 2011. It started with the non-solar and then followed by the solar itself, which also picked up. So the REC scheme offers a renewable power generator the choice to either sell electricity to the distribution company, the DISCOM, or any other obligated entity at a preferred tariff, which is higher than the fossil fuel-based tariff, let's say, or to sell the power at an average power price based on other existing agreements, purchase agreements, which are there, devoid of the environmental attribute that it has a renewable source from which it has been generated. And this green attribute is sold separately as the REC certificate. So it basically unbundles the product. One REC signifies 1 megawatt hour of renewable based power. And there were two types which were distinguished, solar versus non-solar, which is when it is injected into the grid. And the REC is implemented by the National Load Dispatch Center under the POSCO, which is under the Ministry of Power. Next, please. I should perhaps also point out, while I said that a renewable energy generator has the choice, theoretically the choice to choose between selling at a preferred tariff versus at a regular fossil fuel-based average power price. In implementation, that choice does not exist because to be able to participate in the REC market, the project under which the REC is being under which the renewables are being generated, renewable electricity is being generated, has to be registered, first accredited and then registered at the central level as being a REC project. And then it would be, so there are eligibility conditions which are associated. So you may choose to take part in the REC market, for which you would have, of course, entry costs, or choose not to be participating. And of course, eligibility also means if you have not participated earlier or something. So those details are also there. So this table gives us a snapshot of the energy mix, the target versus what has been actually achieved. As I said earlier, the focus is on 2019-20 financial year. For India, of course, the financial year runs from 1st of April through the 31st of March of the next year. So what we see in the last column here, which is the actual installed electricity capacity grid, it is referring to March of 2020, 31st March. And I highlight this row, which is renewable-based capacity, which is consisting of solar, wind, biomass, and small hydro. We have achieved about 23.5% of our capacity. If you recall, we actually had a target of 36% and moving on towards 54%. So considering 2021, 22 is just knocking and it's just a few months away, obviously there is a large difference or gap that we have in terms of the target achieved. Next, please. In terms of the actual electricity produced based on renewables, the total grid connected renewable based electricity generation for the last 6 years that we have here, again, my attention would be to the year 2019-2020. And we notice that the share of renewable-based power in the grid is about 10%. So considering the last 6 years, we have achieved reasonably significant growth, like annual about 5% and then increasing to 9% as far as the share is concerned. But it is nowhere close to the RPO target that we had set. If you recall, the target for 2019-20 set notified by the Ministry of Power was 17.5, and we have achieved about 10 as of today. The other thing that I would like to draw your attention to is the annual growth in renewable energy-based electricity. It has or achieved double-digit figures of 24% over the 3 years, 2016-17, 2017-18, 2017-19. But in 2019-20, it dipped. And since this is all data corresponding to prior to, 2 minutes, okay, I'll try my best. Prior to the pandemic, this is not a spoiler coming from the pandemic. And this is also a little disconcerting since renewable-based power generation has actually been, the cost of producing or generating has been reducing dramatically, both globally as well as in India. Next slide, please. So the average levelized cost of electricity of utility scale solar photovoltaic, which is large scale, production declined by 82% at the world level. In particular for India, it reduced by 85%. So India has actually been highlighted, and there is a lot of enthusiasm that we can achieve great kind of targets, and especially given the targets that we had set, very ambitious, but there was obviously a lot of optimism around it. The REC trading takes place at 2 exchanges, the Indian Energy Exchange in Delhi and the Power Exchange in Mumbai, once a month, or used to. But it was actually regulated in terms of both the price floor as well as the price ceiling. And periodically, the CERC would revise these price bands. Next, please. In this table, there are these price controls which had been revised. In particular for 2015-17, it was revised twice in that period for solar, which led to, of course, a lot of dissatisfaction and a case being put against the trading, so that there was trading which stalled in the market. And then again in 2020, when the floor was reduced to 0 and the price ceiling was equalized across solar versus non-solar, even though to begin with, the solar RECs used to be far more expensive than the non-solar. Next, please. So the key feature that we have of the REC market performance is one, that the RE auctions, which are double blind, had actually ended up being very close to the price floor. And yet the demand was not forthcoming because the renewable purchase obligations were not being implemented or honored at the state level, such that despite low prices, the green attribute price that the RECs were supposed to garner in the market didn't take place. And we had essentially a problem of mounting inventory of RECs over the years. Next, please. This is just showing the same, but also marking the period when there was a break. Yes, next, please. I will finish in the next slide. Next, please. We can move on to the next. Essentially, there are demand side short. So in terms of evaluating the performance, one way to look at RE certification rate is to look at the share of renewable energy which is generated, what part of it is actually being certified or going through the REC market. And what we notice is the initial years since 2011, it had increased, but then eventually after 2017, it started decline, and it has actually been consistently declining, which essentially shows that the REC market no longer is an attractive market for the RE-based energy producers, and they have been avoiding it. Next, please. And what the Ministry of Power has actually proposed in terms of changing the design of the market is increasing the validity of the RECs to take care of the mounting inventory. Again, that is a posture that they had earlier, which hadn't quite worked well. They have also brought in, next slide, please. They have also brought in large hydro under renewables, having changed the definition of what is renewable energy. Essentially, it's an attempt to get to the target, but the proposal essentially misses out on upholding one of the key features of the REC scheme, and it doesn't do enough in terms of asking for the RPO to be complied with much seriousness. So a lot of the focus has been on the supply side, but not really on the demand side, which is what plagued the market. And thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Soni, for that excellent review of the renewable energy certificate trading market in India. And now I would like to invite my own colleague, Mr. Len George, Principal Energy Specialist from the Pacific Department, to discuss this paper. Thank you. Over to you, Len.
Thank you, Dr. Priyantha, and thank you, Dr. Soni, for this very interesting paper that you presented. I work in the operations division, so a lot of my comments are coming in more from an operational perspective in terms of how we look at projects, particularly in the South Asian region. I had been involved several years ago on some of the first solar parks that ADB had done in the states of Gujarat and Rajasthan. So there were several interesting discussions around that time frame in terms of what needed to happen on supporting renewable energy, particularly at a national level. So thank you for the opportunity to come in and help provide some thoughts on this paper. Can we go to the next slide, please? So yes, so before I get into the slide, again, as Professor Sani has said, India had, of course, set these targets. These were outlined in the National Action Plan for Climate Change, moving from 5% in 2009-10 to about 15% by 2020. There was also a lot of, focus on the role of the Electricity Act, the tariff policy, in terms of who would be playing that role in the states. And what's important here is India, the electricity sector is a concurrent subject. So a lot of the, definitions around procurement and renewable procurement and tariffs have traditionally been set at the state level. And that was, of course, coming from the Electricity Act and then supported by the electricity policy and then the tariff policy. But some of the behavior, before the REC mechanism came in was, we saw wide divergence among states, particularly in terms of how these targets were set there was always pushback from the utilities to the regulator about the realism of some of these targets. I mean, that's always been a discussion, and that's continued for a long time. And most distribution companies would come back and inform the regulator that the state may not have access to biomass resources. There is a supply constraint. PPAs have been signed. There's concerns about transmission evacuation, and those were the reasons typically given for not complying with these targets. And the regulatory response used to be typically muted. A lot more focus, particularly in the early years, was on tariff setting, was on laying out directives about loss reduction. The whole element of renewable procurement was not really provided a mainstream focus. That we saw that once the NAPCC came in and started talking of the need for looking at this more nationally, I think that's been a discussion point. Could we move to the next slide, please? Yes. So the way I'm looking at this, I had a few suggestions and issues that came up, particularly when we were looking at designing these projects. And the way the REC construct was imagined, it was set at a time when solar tariffs were about 16 rupees or 18 rupees a kilowatt hour. You had the APPC closer to about 4 or 5 rupees. So there was a huge difference between what renewable tariffs would be and what APPC was. And therefore, the whole argument was, why not look at the renewable energy resource-rich states, buying the power, unbundling the project, and looking at buying the power component, while passing on the green certificates to states that would never have that resource. And this was typically an argument that would be made in places like Rajasthan or Gujarat. Well, the deserts of Rajasthan can produce 25,000 megawatts of the 100,000 megawatt target. So let's all focus on getting all the solar power in Rajasthan happening. But what was interesting, and this actually appears to be more of a supply side issue, because the whole concept of the REC is that you're expecting that the distribution company would be open to the idea of purchasing renewable energy as regular power. But a lot of states actually said, no, we don't want the renewable energy. And some of the reasons were, again, purely from a technical perspective or a utility point of view, they had challenges with forecasting renewable energy. If you just look at that graph, it shows you the variability that they noticed with wind energy. And this was about 10 years ago, where you have forecasting and scheduling in a 15-minute time block. And you can just notice how the variations happen on a 15-minute by 15-minute basis. And it's every day, and there's significant amount of variation, close to about 40–50% at times. And therefore, states, if they had a choice, would say, this is going to cause a lot more challenges to us in terms of forecasting. There are commercial issues with us having to buy this power. There are also challenges with reactive power, balancing, settlement. We need to make more investments on our grids, on ancillary services. And therefore, if this is intermittent power, there's a very low desirability for it in the resource-rich states. And a lot of the conversation around 2011 to about 2014 was really about cajoling some of these states to make these investments and offering them, supports to the PSDF and other funds. But that's one thing that came in, which states were circumspect about trying to look at intermittent renewable energy being something that they would purchase and pay the average power purchase cost for, particularly when you look at some of the other options that they had. So that was one view that, there's also a supply side issue here in terms of, are the states where the renewables are housed, are they really willing, to certify and provide these RECs? That's one. The next slide, please. The other part is around, the national demand supply, and this is more of capacity addition. Here it was more about, if you look at very high level figures, you have 350 gigawatts of, installed capacity. The peak demand is about, 200 odd gigawatts. So there's a significant gap. Of course, a lot of the installations, as you've also said, have largely been on solar in the last 5 to 7 years. And that's where, it's happened. Of course, there's still been some amount of coal and other sources coming in. But one interesting element that, was also debated was the role of the green energy corridors vis-a-vis the REC mechanism. The REC mechanism assumes that there is someone purchasing the power, and you're able to sell the energy credit or the green credit to another state. The green energy corridors was another part of this, arsenal from the national government to put in these transmission corridors connecting these resource-rich states to states which would offtake the power, and therefore in a way kind of widening this, the angle. So you're not really looking at someone buying a credit; you're actually talking to them buying the power itself. And so we've seen states like Uttar Pradesh or West Bengal willing to buy power from states like Rajasthan, where this power is being produced. And I'm just wondering there if the REC mechanism was to a certain extent affected by the fact that you had these transmission corridors put in place, which took away from what the REC would have promised, in terms of providing that unbundling and supply. Next slide, please. This was more in terms of looking at how the tariffs moved, and this is again a point that you said, about 80% odd reduction in tariffs that have been happening over the last 10, 12 years. From our perspective, a lot of this was also because projects tended to get bigger. You had these solar parks coming in. We moved from 5 megawatt, 7 megawatt projects to individual projects of 100, 200 megawatts. A lot of the transmission was being laid upfront, so that reduced the risk. So what's really interesting is we're seeing this reduction in the regulated tariff from about 16 rupees all the way down to about 2.4 or 2 at this point of time. However, the APPC itself has consistently been in this range of about 3.4 to 3.9, right? And therefore, if you're looking at it commercially, a resource-rich state would say, why would I need to pay that much to get access to non-green energy from a renewable producer when I could probably just sign a PPA and get it at 2 rupees or 3 rupees. And the fact that the green energy corridors were in place kind of made that argument a little stronger. And of course, the intermittency aspect, if this was biomass and it's firm energy, they'd probably look at this differently than solar. So that's just another hypothesis in terms of, the supply states were not probably as interested in this as some of the demand states. Next slide, please. Again, I just a couple of other thoughts. One was in terms of bankability, and you've made a point about the REC mechanism and the time frame. I think that's a good point. I mean, it's just looking at extending it from a period of 1 year to about 3 years. But more fundamentally, the question is, when a bank is lending to a project, we're expecting to get some kind of certainty on the revenue streams, on the ability to service debt. You get that with a long-term PPA. But in the REC market, where you're depending on the APPC, which is changing it, year to year, you're also depending on what's happening with the renewable REC prices. So there's all that uncertainty that comes in, and as you said, there's a range of fiscal instruments available. Whether the REC mechanism is really the best, for some of these intermittent sources is therefore a question. One other interesting aspect, and you've touched upon on the need for reform in the distribution companies. I think that was one point that you had, you had stressed on. I noted that. Sorry, just the last slide. Sorry. One point here was, a lot of these RECs are being sold in states where there is private distribution companies. So Delhi, for example, or Mumbai, or Gujarat, Torrent. Do you see that as because there's always been some kind of regulatory antipathy between private distribution company and the regulator, whereas probably public distribution companies behave differently, or is it that they're just more efficient with procurement? And given what we're seeing in the last few days with this whole project monetization pipeline and distribution companies potentially being offered to the private sector, do you see that could be potentially another aspect that comes in which would help strengthen and achieve some of these reform objectives that you've been talking in your paper. So thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Just thought I'll share some of those thoughts with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Len. If it is not an issue, I presume, Professor Soni, you can probably address these discussion points in the new version of the paper, because I would like to straight away go into in the interest of time for the next presentation. Is that all right, Professor?
Yes, in the interest of time, I will accept that. Thank you for your thank you for your comments.
If you want to have just one sentence last word on these comments overall, please. Yes.
Yes, I think what you have essentially highlighted was the trade-off that the generators also saw in terms of selling it directly versus going the direct path. And I think I didn't touch upon that, essentially because I was looking ex post what has happened and all of the interventions which came into the market. So I think I was trying to highlight the innumerable interventions which came, and the market itself got overloaded with regulations. But I know I'm taking up time, so I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I will kindly stop later.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation, and of course, very insightful discussion too. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's now move to the next presenter. That is, we have two presentations, country presentations. The first one comes from Malaysia. Ms. Esther Lu from the Principal Assistant Secretary from the Energy Division, Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources. Thank you. Ms. Liu, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Session Chair. Can I request that I will just share my screen, my presentation screen myself? Is that okay?
Should be fine, yeah.
Okay, just let me do the... Okay. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can. Yes, please.
And okay, thank you so much. So I will start my presentation. Distinguished guests, Session Chair, fellow presenters, workshop participants, ladies and gentlemen, a very good day to all. I'm Esther, the Senior Principal Assistant Secretary for Renewable Energy at the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources of Malaysia. And my ministry oversees the policy and development of electricity supply in Malaysia. And let me also take this opportunity to thank ADBI Institute for inviting us to be part of this congregation of eminent mind. And my presentation will be on the effort on renewable energy and low carbon energy transition in Malaysia. My presentation will provide a snippet on the low carbon energy transition, which includes the following highlights. I will start with an overview of the energy and electricity supply system in Malaysia, followed by the RE development policy, and our aspiration for a sustainable low carbon energy transition. I will also provide an overall perspective on the performance indicators for the electricity supply sector before I conclude my presentation. So to begin, let me share with you the guiding principle for the formulation of energy policy in Malaysia. In charting our energy transition pathway, our energy policy and planning are guided by three tenets in the energy trilemma, namely security of supply, sustainability, and affordability. The Malaysian government acknowledged the need to transition towards a sustainable electricity sector, and we reckon that there will be a time when high share of variable RE will be the dominant capacity in our power system. Therefore, pragmatic move to future-proof, strengthen, and enhance our power supply in infrastructure have been planned and even implemented to ensure that the fundamental principle of energy equity for all Malaysians in accessing affordable and reliable electricity supply will be upheld. and no one will be deprived or left worse off as the country electricity supply system transition towards a sustainable, low carbon, modern system. Here is an overview of the overall energy profile in Malaysia. Fossil fuel is still the key primary energy supply in Malaysia, and RE make up of approximately 7% of total primary energy supply. In terms of final energy consumption, transportation and industry is the largest energy consumer, with electricity, which is under the purview of my ministry, making up 20% of the total final energy use. I will deliberate further on how Malaysia is working on gradually transitioning the electricity supply sector to have more renewable energy in the power generation system. A perspective on Malaysia's electricity supply industry. Our electricity supply gigawatt. We have
Hello, I think we have a connection problem from the speaker.
Sorry, I think disconnected, right?
Okay, yeah, but like okay now.
Yeah, so can you hear me now? Sorry,
Yes, yes, please.
share my slide again. I'm so sorry, everyone. So can I just know, like, sorry, where did I got cut off?
I cannot really remember which slide it was.
It was like mapped with some islands.
Okay, sure. I think sorry, let me share the slide now.
You know, if that makes better, I mean, if you ask us to share your screen, maybe the connection for you is better, but it's up to you.
Yeah, it's okay. So I think I got cut off here, right? Is that true?
Okay.
Okay, sure. Sorry, my apologies. So I will continue. So this is just a perspective on Malaysia's electricity supply industry, which is divided into 3 independent subsystems based on our geographical location. And the total power installed capacity in Malaysia is actually 35.6 gigawatt compared to the total overall demand of 23.6 gigawatt. So we have actually sufficient supply to cater to all the demand of electricity consumer in Malaysia. And Peninsular Malaysia, which accounted for 80% of the country's electricity demand, is our largest system. So from the total 35.6 gigawatt installed capacity that we currently have, around 7.9 gigawatt or 23% are from renewable energy, and coal and gas are the main source of power generation in Malaysia. So if we take a deeper glimpse on the RE composition, we observe that hydropower is the dominant renewables, making up of 68% from the total RE capacity. And this is followed by solar at 17% from the total RE, or 3.9% from the total installed capacity. So in terms of the effort on RE development in Malaysia, it has started way back in 2001, focusing on the utilization of empty fruit bunch from oil palm production residue for power generation. And it follows by the National Renewable Energy Policy, which was introduced in 2010, followed by the institutionalized of RE development through the enactment of law in 2011, and subsequently the implementation of feed-in tariff program, RE auctioning, solar energy purchase were implemented. As a result, the RE installed capacity for resources other than large hydro increased 48 times at the end of 2020. And the cost of RE generation, especially solar, has as well dropped from 11.3 US cents per kilowatt hour in 2017 to 4.6 US cents per kilowatt hour in 2020. The exponential increment in RE capacity in our power system is expected to continue and is projected to triple its capacity at the end of 2025. In pursuit of the equilateral triangle that form the energy trilemma, including the country's commitment for a sustainable low carbon energy transition, the Malaysian government has set a target of increasing the existing RE capacity mix from the current 23% to 31% in 2025 and a further 40% in 2035. These targets are determined based on technical, social, and economic considerations, including grid penetration limit, grid flexibility, research margin, as well as impact to consumer tariff. The RE capacity will be achieved through the implementation of various RE programs, like what other speaker before me had shared, consisting of auctioning, FIT, net metering, self-consumption, a quasi-market mechanism called New Enhanced Dispatch Arrangement, and the implementation of renewable energy certificate. 6 key focus areas have also been identified to drive and support Malaysia's aspiration for a sustainable low-carbon energy transition, with RE making up more than 1/3 of our source of power generation. The 6 key focus areas, which you can see on the slides, are intended to address the needed policy direction, as well as providing related enablers and technical support in realizing the government's intent to achieve a higher RE target. If we translate the 31% RE target into installed capacity, Malaysia is expected to have more than 13 gigawatt of operating renewable energy capacity by 2025 and 18 gigawatt renewable energy capacity by 2035. In other words, the RE capacity is projected to increase by more than 2-fold from 8,000 megawatt in 2021 to 18,000 megawatt in 2035. For Peninsula, which is the energy demand epicenter in Malaysia, which make up of 70% of total energy demand, RE capacity will reach 8.5 gigawatt in 2025, which is 26% of the total projected power installed capacity, and 11 gigawatt or 32% in 2035. Solar will be instrumental resources in achieving the stipulated RE target, and it is anticipated from 2025 onwards, solar will unseat hydro as the dominant source of RE in Peninsular Malaysia, with more than 50% capacity in the power mix. The deployment of solar in Peninsular Malaysia will increase from the current 1 gigawatt to 4.4 gigawatt in 2025 and 6.6 gigawatt in 2035. The 4-fold increment of solar capacity in 2025 and 6-fold increment compared to existing capacity will open up sizable future investment value in the RE for Malaysia. The transition towards a lower carbon energy pathway will be a gradual process in Malaysia. As you can see in this slide, it shows how we transition our electricity supply to cleaner fuel to reduce the GHG emissions from the power sector. As you can see here, our existing coal PPA will start to retire in 2029. And this capacity will be replaced mostly by gas and RE, lowering our carbon emission. There will be no new coal plant up. As solar holds the highest potential in Malaysia, most of our RE capacity will be contributed by solar. Hence, the government plans to introduce battery energy storage system, which bar that you can see in this slide. Our plan is to introduce utility scale BESS with a total capacity of 500 megawatt from 2030 to 2035. And it will be undertaken in stages as in my following slide. Be that as
you can wrap up in a minute. That would be good.
Okay, I'll try my best. Thank you so much. Okay, be that as it may, if you can see here, it is this will be the progression on introduction of BSS system in Malaysia. However, it's important to note that the power system and capacity planning undertaken by the government is a dynamic exercise, taking into account the advent and advancement of new technology, global trends, system readiness, as well as prevailing integration costs to the system. Therefore, the macro policy planning will evolve in tandem with latest technological and socio-economic development. So as a whole, the RE target that the government have put forth is in line and comparable with the RE target adopted by countries within the ASEAN region, in which most ASEAN countries will have at least 30% RE by 2035. So this is, as a whole, we can see that the balanced approach in power, system and capacity planning adopted by a government has enabled Malaysia to enjoy reliable power supply affordably. For instance, the system average interruption duration index in Peninsular Malaysia is 50 minutes per year, which is one of the lowest in the region. And you can see, and our level of supply reliability is at par with that of developed country, in which their electricity tariff is much higher. So a Malaysian household spend an average of 127 ringgit or 30 USD per month for electricity bill, which is sort of like 2.8% of the average total household expenditure of 1,000 USD per month. And furthermore, Malaysia is also ranked number 4 among 190 countries with high reliability and transparency in tariff setting. So all in, the energy transition initiative that Malaysia is undertaking through the implementation of these various RE initiatives is expected to drive down at least 45% of the carbon intensity in the power sector by 2025 and a further 60% by 2035 compared to the 2005 baseline. And in conclusion, the key challenges for us as policymakers in Malaysia, and I think everywhere else too, is to find the right balance between the 3 elements of the energy trilemma. At one hand, we would like to push for a higher target of RE in our capacity system. However, we must also take into account the affordability of our people and the resilience of our energy system. In other words, we are trading the sustainable energy path cautiously because we know that it comes with a cost, and we believe that our energy transition plan should be affordable in line with SDG 7 of ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. With that, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Liu. That excellent presentation on the situation in Malaysia and what you all have been doing. There is a question already. Let me ask Dina. Would you like to ask the question? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I really enjoyed. It was very clear. And I'm impressed with that graph you showed till 2039, how Malaysia plans retire coal plants, replace them with cleaner. And you even added batteries, like small red batteries, but batteries still expensive. And I think for some time they still will be expensive. So I want to ask about any plans for electricity, like expanding transmission lines or exporting electricity, like for example, UK and European Union, because they have very high share of renewable energy and high intermittency because of that. So for that, they didn't rely only on storage or batteries because it's very expensive. So they mainly relied on transmission from north to south, let's say, or abroad. So any plans for Malaysia? Maybe you plan to sell electricity to Singapore or any other neighboring countries?
Thank you, Dina. Over to you, Ms. Liu.
Okay, thank you, Dina, for your question. I think Dina actually pointed out some very apt point about the cost of battery storage. That is why I think you can see, like in my presentation, we sort of like we are currently looking at what is most feasible for us to do, and the utility scale will only come online in 2035. Be that as it may, I think we do not actually deter any, we call it like off-grid battery installation, but on grid integration, I mean the study and the, what do you call it, the study and the pilot project is actually needed for us to have gain more insight. Then on the second question, like, is there any plan from Malaysia to actually embark on inter-country power trade? I think under the ASEAN framework, there is actually a ASEAN power grid, and then the what do you call it, ASEAN power trade that is happening, like between Malaysia. Right now, Malaysia already have I mean power trade between Laos. So we call it the LTMS, Laos, Thailand, Malaysia Power Trade Agreement. So it's already in the, what you call it, it's already being implemented. And I think like last year we have sort of like 100 megawatt of power exchange between Malaysia and Laos. But I mean, maybe I think most of you will see it, like, I mean, it's actually very being publicly promoted in the media that, I mean, Malaysia will be looking into the possibility of having a power trade with Singapore, which this is something that actually is in the pipeline that Malaysia is looking at. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Liu. And of course, I have a question. You can always answer it anytime.
Yeah,
That's, you know, when it comes to Malaysia, you have an excellent reliability of supply, as you could see. You know, I saw your presentation. And so will that be impacted by your ambitious plans for renewable energy, because these are all intermittent? Have you done a thorough analysis of the impact of this intermittency in your reliability?
Yeah, thank you. So what I can say is, like, at this point of time, if you can see, I think solar just, I mean, consists of sort of like maybe like 4% of our total power installed capacity. So I do think that in Malaysia, we have not really like go into the, what do you call it, the area of where you have very high intermittency. So that's why that while we plan that to have like higher solar penetration or higher variable renewable penetration in our system, at the meantime, we are also, and we are currently conducting like various studies. One is study and some pilot plan to actually look at the impact, not only impact to the system, but as well as the impact to the, what you call the tariff, or impact the cost to the system. Because I mean, like most of you are aware, Malaysia has a regulated electricity supply market, and there is a lot of forward commitment capacity that actually there is already PPA in place. So we can't basically like just stop the things like overnight. So these are all the things that we are actually, the regulator and the ministry is looking at. I mean, the last thing we want is the, like what I mentioned, like the last thing we want is that if we introduce more renewable in the system, the people, the people get worse off in the system.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
fully
Agree. Fully agree. Yes. Thank you very much, Ms. Liu, for this excellent presentation and covering more or less within such a short period the whole of what situation you are in Malaysia. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. And that's excellent. So let me now go into the next presentation on India country presentation by Nishant Tiwari, Officer of Special Duty to the Union Minister of Power, New and Renewable Energy, India, and President. Yeah, over to you, Mr. Tiwari. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It just depends from wherever world you are just tuned in. So it's a nice morning for me here at Howard. It's like 5:30 a.m. in the morning. Nice to see you all, and the presentations has been really good. And I would just touch upon certain major points and what we have been doing in the last decade or so. And so to start with, I'll so how we move on to the next slide. I mean,
probably Oh, yeah, there you are. I think
Yeah.
somebody else will run the slides for you.
Yeah, I think so. So the recent climate transparency reports, India, the only G20 country on track to achieve 2-degree goals of Paris Agreement. And we all know how important that commitment to the world was. We are in a situation where it's like now or never. And the climate urgency, I mean, the trilemma regarding energy transition, whether it's good for us, whether it's good for planet, whether it's good for like sustainability, and whether it's good to have a good business sense around whatever initiatives we're taking in renewable energy sector, that is all gone. The only question that remains now, and that is like how much accelerated efforts all the countries together can put, I mean, in this arena, so that we have a better planet, better future for our children to come. So next, please. So I think there are certain things we've been discussing with many other countries, and they really ask me during conversations, what is that makes you a very emerging country, emerging economy as far as renewable energy sector is concerned? What does that click do? And during those discussions, I generally say that we have a very visionary prime minister who had given us visibility where we want to be in like 2022, 2030, and that trajectory is so much encouraging that there's so much investment flowing in. When we said to the world that we are going to have 175 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2022, initially when it was announced, nobody believed us. And we have already achieved our 100 gigawatt target. So that's something where we are. And that is despite all the issues we had around COVID. And it was tough because we are looking for green recovery. And amidst all the uncertainties, we could achieve 100 gigawatt target. And many of the projects are under installation, under construction. So I'm pretty sure that we're going to overshoot that target as well. And since 2017, we just have, the rate of renewable energy growth is much beyond what was there in the traditional coal sector. And our installed solar capacity has grown like 14 times since 2014. That is like phenomenal for us. And we started when the tariffs were around 10 rupees, more than 10 rupees. Now the tariffs have come down to below 2 rupees. So this scale up has improved our business sense around it. Now it's a perfect business sense to start any renewable energy project in India. And this policy push, I mean, we talked about visibility, that is a good for investors. I mean, investors globally, they would like to see where their fund is getting invested and how they're going to put the money into a country like India, because all these projects are capital intensive, and governments alone cannot invest all that money into this sector. So we bid, we came out with bids, international bids also, and those were successful. Next, please. Another scheme was around, that was energy generation I was talking about, that around 40% of mix would come from our renewable energy capacity. We already installed like 38% of our renewable energy mix. Energy mix is still coming from renewable energy, and that's going to grow. Then we focus on energy efficiency. And the Bureau of Energy Efficiency launched a program called Perform, Achieve, and Trade. And it was operated in many cycles. We've been giving targets to consumers, especially big consumers, thermal power plants and discoms, to improve efficiency in their operations, and how much energy they consume for producing per unit of per unit of any produce they have. That was given a target like this: you have to reduce your emissions in 3-year cycle. Now, if they achieve that, they're getting certificates, and that could have been traded into electricity exchange. So that has worked really well for us, and the reduction is like 62 million tons equivalent of CO2 per annum. And associated with that, we started standards and labeling a scheme where energy appliances were given star ratings. And we expected consumers, and we rallied around it and showed them the benefits around having a high efficient equipments at home and at businesses. So that also worked out, and we could reduce a lot of emissions around that. Next, please. Then another success was our Ujala program, and we were trying to replace street lights with LEDs, and that resulted in a reduction of almost 260 million tons per annum, and around 114 million street lights have been replaced. So we launched a corporation, WESL, and that in collaboration with municipalities and urban bodies, they launched this program. And the new version is still coming up. It's called Gram Ujala, where we're taking this initiative to villages. And we hope to, again, benefited by carbon trading here as well. So this is something which can be replicated across emerging economies, and this is going to reduce emissions big time. Next, please. Another yet breakthrough for emerging economy like India is like the recently launched PM Kusum program. There's the solar farming scheme. Just to give you the background, around 22 million agricultural pumps are connected to the grid, and they consume around 213 billion units, and it is 18% of the total electricity consumption. And around 8 million pumps out of those are running on diesel. If you do the rough calculation of having a pump to be like 5 horsepower and one running for 5 hours in a day for say 120 days in a year, the total diesel consumption works to be like 5.5 billion liter per annum. And that would mean like we are emitting 15.4 million tons of CO2 every year. And whatever extra is there, that also is coming from grid, the electricity, which is not on the diesel. And yet again, in turn, those that electricity is generated mostly by thermal power plants, and their emissions are also there. So we are charting out a new path by launching a scheme. We are trying to replace all these solar pumps, all these pumps, agricultural pumps, with solar pumps. So not only that will ease out some electricity bill to ultimate consumer that are like poor farmer. It also would mean that they can supply electricity back to the grid in certain times when they are producing more, and they can trade that electricity. So there are various flavors of this scheme, and we call it A, B, C, and whatever is suitable for a farmer or a small or a big farmer, they can choose that scheme. So we are rolling it out big time, and we envisage that if it is implemented fully, this is going to reduce CO2 or greenhouse emissions by as much as 32 million tons of equivalent per annum. And that is huge for a country like India. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. And as I talked about how we've been able to give visibility to investors all across the globe, and in last 5 to 6 years, over 64 billion US dollars worth investments has been made in the renewable energy sector in India. Bloomberg in recent report said we are the most attractive destination for investment. And truly so, when the fund is lying with the sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, and they want to invest in emerging economies for higher returns, it does make sense to invest in emerging countries like India. And we eased out policy, now a very liberal foreign investment policy regime. Investors can invest on their own or enter into joint ventures with Indian partners. And there's so many collaboration happenings. And we ensured ease of doing business. So we focus on maintaining sanctity of contracts and safeguarding investments. We have project development cells and FDI cells in all ministries, even in Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. If you want to set up a plant in India, we are always available to guide you and support you all throughout the process. It's a single window system. So I think this has worked well for India, that we are seen as a risk-free investment destination with high returns globally. Next, please. And there were times when it seemed as if, whatever the trajectory we were on, and when the COVID struck worldwide, so it was setback for industry, and many people were like, who were, installing plants and going through the processes. They find it difficult to go through the complete process because of the lockdown, and financial stress around it. So we came out with a lot of 90,000 crore worth of package stimulus we provided to economy, and that helped things kept going on. And during all this, we could achieve 100 gigawatt target. And recently, in a climate ambition summit held on 1st December 2020, we even raised our target of renewable energy to 450 gigawatts by 2030. And it's just beyond our commitment, what we did in like Paris climate agreements. And I would say that it's our commitment to ourselves. We're not looking at what other country is doing, or I mean, it's not at something credible. We just believe our government believes in environment sustainability, and they're keeping targets for themselves, and we've been achieving that. Recently, we are exploring the hydrogen. I mean, it's a very powerful things happening around in many countries. A lot of technology innovations are coming around, and we also could see a sample plant was established in Rajasthan, and it worked really well. We are quite enthusiastic about it. And as per one calculation, the investment opportunity is like $250 billion in next 30 years. And we can start off with 10 gigawatt or 20 gigawatt targets in times to come. But we are really set on this path, and we think it's going to change the landscape all across the world. And India should be a major destination for people who want to invest in hydrogen. And we see it happening mostly around industry which are like high on fuel consumptions, like fertilizers, steel generation, and long distance transportation. Yes, that is also there. Next, please. And we are pushing for renewable infrastructure. We've been importing solar cell from across the globe, but now we're putting in plants. We are encouraging manufacturers to produce or manufacturing solar cells domestically. We are coming with up with SEZs, and we are also promoting sustainable public transport, because a major chunk of economy is not just how we generate and consume electricity. It's also about transportation, where they are the fossil fuel guzzlers. And we are investing a lot in e-vehicle infrastructure. We have promotion schemes, subsidy schemes, and we are trying to create infrastructure, especially along the highways and metro network, so that they run on sustainable energy and renewable energy. And I think that's going to further help us bring down the emissions big time. Next, please. And globally, we've been advocating the cause for alliance around the solar and renewable energy. And our Prime Minister believes that it's one sun, one world. And this initiative is like all the countries, the sun is shining bright somewhere in the globe, and we can export and import that energy. And that will also help us, reducing the cost around storage. So that is one initiative that was taken by India and France, and that was like, we are looking for positive climate action. And we're trying to mobilize funds and help other countries, especially in Africa and small island developing states and least developed countries, where we think, the energy access is still a challenge, but the kind of programs they're going to take, that's going to affect all of us, because it's just one planet. So ISA is trying for not just finance, but also technology transfer, and they're going to support these economies with regulatory infrastructure. So all three things, and we were trying to increase investments. Even Indian public sector companies, and they've been, nudged to explore those possibilities in Africa. And we have good cooperation coming up. More than 100 countries are on the platform. And we are coming up with some announcements at the COP26 summit. And that is, I think ISA is the future. I mean, it can bring economies together, and we can work together, and we can learn from each other. So I think these were certain initiatives which India took, and we can get into technical details. I mean, each one would require a separate presentation. But I think largely the landscape is set by giving a commitment, which is like, and we commit to ourselves to energy transition, and give visibility to investors, and we create a policy regime where we see that investments are coming and projects are getting commissioned, and it's a single window system. Also, we are technology agnostic in a sense. We just don't adhere to one technology. There are different regions in India, and we think if somewhere wind and solar can do some hybrid schemes, somewhere solar is beneficial, how that can be integrated to grid. So technology and we're trying to innovate all the time, not just with technology, with also financial bidding process. We came up with 24/7 renewable energy capacity with storage. So that hybrid bids were also really successful, and I think we need to experiment around what financial structure we have around this development, what technology innovation we have supported through policy, and how much commitment we show to the world that we are transitioning at a rate which is unbelievable. That was like when somebody talked about hydrogen mission being launched a year before. We are not sure about the technology and there were certain doubts, but we are really on that path to start a new journey. So I think things are really changing fast. It's a very dynamic world, and we need to be we need to collaborate, because countries have their own experiences and we can learn from each other. So I just stop at that, and it's been really speaking.
Thank you very much, Siwari, for that excellent wrap up of the India situation in terms of clean energy interventions, which is really important for the whole world. As you know, we always look at India and China as the leaders when it comes to decarbonization, as all of us know. So let me request Dina, you want to have a question? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Nishant, excellent presentation. Thank you so much for explaining about India situation. Yeah, my question is, when last time I went to India, it was winter. I remember it was high pollution, right? Usually, same my country in Kazakhstan also. When it's winter, we have more pollution because people start heating houses. Yeah. So do you think renewable energy could be answer to this problem, or need something else?
Yeah, definitely, Dina. Lovely talking to you. And I learned about your experiences in India, and we all face these. Especially around big cities where the electricity consumption is high, and there's certain plants which are fossil fuel based, and this is adding to pollution. And I think it's a warning for all of us that it's not sustainable way of living, and we need to change the way we generate and consume electricity. You are very right when you say that renewable energy is one good solution, because the way we're generating energy is like we're not emitting greenhouse gases, and this really helps keeping us a clean environment around our cities as well. And also it gives us some kind of mostly the pollution is around in the mornings or in the evenings when the load on the grid is really high, and because of that we try to scale up. And what we have done is we're trying to switch, like Delhi airport is also switching over to renewable energy capacity, and they're having large solar farms, and I think that has really helped the situation in and around that area. And even the EV thing, we're trying to have chargers everywhere at homes in Delhi, and people are now switching over to EV. Even our ministry, they started using EV big time, and we found it that now there is a market for EVs, and which is growing rapidly. It's not just fuel efficient, it's efficient financially also. It's helping, it's like creating less burden for the families who want to switch to EV. And in the charging mechanism is also, I think, really easy. You just plug it. So that shift is happening. We are trying to move to cooking also to solar. It's still not, I think it's not there where we want to be. But slowly, because the transition, we think there is a consumer behavior around the way we are liking cooking food, and somehow we have to see, grid solution, and then how can we see rather than targeting individual household in urban areas. So that was one question we're looking at. Fourthly, yes, we are trying to go for green buildings and energy efficiency, because I think it's well established fact when you save a unit of electricity, it's as good as generating 1 unit of electricity. So I think
yeah. Thank you, Mr. Sorry that I had to cut down. Let's have short answers to Nella. Would you like to ask question? Yeah, we have few people. So
yeah.
please go
I
ahead.
think I try to, like very short, because I was provoked with your statement in the front that India is the only G20 country that on track for the commitment for the greenhouse gas emission that keep to the 2 degree. So actually, I'm curious. Like what kind of measurement or how you track their commitment. So and then at the end you mentioned also in the renewable energy, you have this Indian commitment, but you don't compare to other countries. Just wonder, because I used to be in the G20 and I had this meeting until 4 a.m. in the morning to create that kind of commitment. Yeah.
So
yeah, please go ahead. Yes.
So it's like not us we are claiming that. First of all, I like to make clear it's a climate transparency report released in 2020, and like there are 20 organizations and they do auditing, energy auditing all across the globe. And 20 organizations came together, they did studies. If you want, I can share the report with you. It's a huge report. They have done a lot of data analysis around that, especially around what we promised, like how we are trying to bring the energy consumption intensity down and how we're switching out to renewables, how much emissions per capita we committed the Paris Climate Agreement. So there's a lot of mathematics around it and the calculation and statistics around it. And its report is available widely. I'm happy to share that report. And I think the major thing is still we're talking about 2 degrees, not 1.5 degrees. And we think we have to go from here 2 degrees to 1.5 degrees. But what we see is not just the developed world or developing world, or everybody is getting affected. Even if we achieve, like India achieves something on the target, if the world doesn't go along with it, and especially the developed world doesn't join the momentum, because India is a growing country. We need to produce more electricity. We need to grow economically. And that's true for not just India, any emerging economy like across Africa, because they also need to balance their economic growth and environmental sustainability. And I think developed countries have eaten like 85% of the carbon space. So how do we these economies grow? So until unless we have some financial support, especially the least developed countries and SIDS from developed world, and that money starts flowing into projects, and so that they just grow, they don't compromise with the job opportunities and economic growth, and as well as they are sustainable, only then we can think of an equitable world. And also we need to look for, per capita emissions, because whenever you talk about India, say the emissions are like, we are the 4th largest country or 5th largest country, that ranking keeps changing. But the fact is, we are a huge country. So when you look at per capita emissions in this part of Asia and other parts of the world, we just also need to figure out where we are. And I think everybody has job to do. Yeah.
Thank you. I think the update is 2020. I used to be in 2018. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Tiwari. Let me request Aparna to ask the last question. I think we have already overrun the time. Aparna, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very kind. I know we are pressed for time. Mr. Tiwari, thank you so much for a very comprehensive presentation. And I mean, it's up to you whether you want to choose to answer this. So while we have been making very kind of ambitious targets and commitments, as you said rightly, India does it for its own sake, not to say that, okay, this is at the international, but nevertheless, we do. And we feel that it is very optimistic we will achieve, especially the capacity installation of renewables. But on the domestic front also, we are very ambitious in terms of our commitments. And let's say in particular for the kind of share of renewables that we expect to have in our grid. So coming from the Ministry of Power, how do you think we would go about achieving the kind of renewable purchase portfolio, that RPO that we have, obligation that the Ministry of Power has set? They're really high shares. And at present, we are at about 10%. So going forward, how do you perceive that we will be achieving this, especially if large number of states are not able to kind of comply?
Yeah, so thank you so much for bringing it up. I mean, that was our concern also, because mostly it also depends on how much you enforce those practices and what are the penalties around it. because if discoms are facing financial distress and they have a legacy dues, and it's not easy to move to renewables, also for the fact that they have to pay the fixed charges what they have committed already to the existing thermal power plants, and they also work in the gap, I mean the variable cost, and if their renewable energy is like within that cost, they can afford that. And we have climate commitments, we want to shift the gear, and still discom, I mean they have to operate financially also, they have to be viable. So how do that switch makes? Would the RPO will be like something which they can go for or not? It's a financial decision for them at the end of the day. It's just not whether they want to do it or not. And I thought the larger question there was because they find it difficult to afford that. They thought I'll rather pay some penalty rather than switching over to and buying this RPO. That was the issue. So we have tried to improve that scenario by bringing in certain instruments and making electricity freely tradable at market exchanges, and REC would be tradable also. And I think there are now better opportunities to enter the market. Secondly, some states are not doing it because they are lazy. At most, I'll say, because it takes an institutional effort to move to something different. Maybe everybody is not having that vision. They're just thinking whatever it is, as it is basis, they want to run the organization. So that would require larger penalties and stringent regulatory efforts. So we moving to that regime also, like the carrot and stick, you would say. If you're not willing to change, we'll make you change. And if you're willing, we'll support you in each and every possible way of the way. So that is it is two things that will come, and you'll see the implications. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Tewari. And in fact, ADB is working very closely with the International Solar Alliance, as you may know, and we manage a good TA. And I'm sitting in Sri Lanka here. Sri Lanka is one of the beneficiaries of ISA TA from ADB, which I used to handle just until a few days ago, because I moved from South Asia Energy Director to this position only a few days ago. So thank you very much. That's excellent insight to what's happening in India, which obviously will help the countries in the neighboring regions also, because we are looking up to India as a big brother to help us in most of these things. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation.
Thank you so much for having me over here. It was such a nice thing to share ideas and learn from all of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So let me thank all the speakers and the discussants, and of course all the audience, which was very active and asking questions and interacting with us. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you, and have a great day, great evening. Thank you. Okay, bye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wijayatunga. Managing the session for a very interesting session. With that, we reached the end of our webinar. I echo Dr. Wijayatunga that thank you everyone to participate today, and thank you for moderator for your hard work. And then so we conclude our event today, but we still have one more day tomorrow. So our webinar, Effective GHG Emission Control Pollution, will start by 3 p.m. again, Tokyo time tomorrow. So we will open the Zoom like 1 hour before for all panelists and speakers to check your audio and everything, and 10 minutes to all audience. For that, thank you very much, and see you again tomorrow.